was wrong to say I wouldn't change a thing, 'cause in the story of our lives, the best of times through color glass, time rolls on enough to let me move on past, but every little now and then it creeps on back to shade my smile.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be, for all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth. Welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of western Georgia on this May 23rd, 2023. Back by popular demand, it is your favorite show. Open lines, open topics tonight. No guests, just 3 hours of answering your questions. Starting, of course, with questions from the ether with Brandon Milam. We also have Father Chris tonight for the full time, I believe. So we're happy to have him back. You don't want to miss this show. Don't go away. Everybody, I welcome you to Vestiges After Dark, and I thank you for joining us this evening. We're sorry for the schedule changes that we had to do. We got a little bit under the weather here, and Tracy was actually supposed to be our guest, and she's still not quite at 100%. So we pushed her episode off till next week, and we moved open lines, open topics here for this evening. So I don't think you're going to complain about that because time and time again, this is everybody's favorite kind of show. It gives you an opportunity to be the guest where you can call in and we'll do our best to answer your question. Or even talk about whatever's on your mind, be it comments that you want to make, stories that you want to tell, whatever. It's your show, and we are here to help answer or clear up anything that might be on your mind. Okay, so I'm looking and I'm seeing there are some frame drops tonight. So it doesn't look like it's destabilizing the feed, but there's been a lot of rain here, and that never seems to bode well for when we have an episode. So if you could all say a prayer right now that we don't have any connection issues, that would be wonderful. But so far, so good. So let's hope it stays that way. I did prioritize the device. Hopefully that will do its magic like it has done in times past. Before we get started with the show, we have our liturgical libations with Jamie Wolfe. How are you doing tonight, Jamie?
I'm doing good. Just responding that we do have, Sonny, we do have your question. We'll get to it.
Okay, yeah. If you want to start asking your questions in the chat, that's fine. You can also call into the show right now if you'd like to. Of course, we're not going to be taking callers until the next segment. So that number, if you'd like to get into the queue, remember we answer questions in the order that we receive them, although most of you like to ask them in the chat room, which is fine. But if you'd like to call in, we'd love to talk with you. That number is 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Remember to enter PIN number 855-4111. That's 855-4111 to be placed into the queue. And don't hang up once you get connected because you'll lose your place in the queue. Okay, but we're not taking calls until the next segment. But if you want to log your place now, you can go ahead and call. I'll put that number up on the screen here at the second segment. So tonight we had this before, the Balvenie 16.
We have the Balvenie 16-year French oak. And yes. I'll just read the paragraph on the back here.
Please.
Maturing for 16 years in traditional American oak whiskey barrels to develop distinct notes of warm honey and vanilla before a finishing period in, I'm going to butcher this French, sorry, it's been 35 years since I took French, Pinot de Charente, French oak casks, bringing velvet sweetness with notes of energizing grapefruit, geranium, glazed fruit, and ginger.
Lots of fruit in this one.
Yes.
Lots of fruit.
And I can taste the ginger, too.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that ginger heat.
Yeah, y'all know I don't drink a lot of scotch, but Balvenie and Dalmore's are probably the two varieties that I do enjoy.
There's never been a scotch I didn't like.
And we know. Hasn't been too many bourbons I didn't like.
Well, I mean, there's a few bourbons that I don't care for, but I do like good bourbon too. I do. I like whiskey. I do
like a
enjoy
good rye.
whiskey. I just don't like boring. I don't like boring stuff.
Yeah.
So blendeds, I am a Scotch snob. I know that a great deal of work and effort and skill goes into blending whiskey.
Absolutely. It's a religious rite.
It is.
You know?
And it needs to be respected for what it is.
Absolutely.
But single malt, I can't, my palate can't move too far past that.
Yeah.
It just can't. And I should say I've never met a single malt I didn't like. That's just
My palate's developing. A couple years ago, I wouldn't have tried any scotch, but you've got me to open it up a little bit, and now I'm starting to enjoy some of them.
Yeah.
Like I said, I like the Highlands and the
You like Speyside, Highlands.
Speyside, thank you.
You like
Speyside's what I was trying to
Campbellton.
think of.
No, not Campbellton. You like the Lowlands.
Yes.
But Campbellton, the islands, like Isla, I don't think
Isla's not my thing.
I don't think the peat is agreeable to your palate. At least not yet.
No, Speyside's the word I was trying to think of. I
Speyside.
really enjoy those.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, here.
Well, oh yes.
And
Cheers.
I gave you a Bishop Drown, not a Jamie.
Oh,
Drown.
I will never turn one down when it's this one. This is just, and I did have wine. I did not have wine tonight, so I'm a little bit behind.
That's going to cause some rosy cheeks, folks. All right.
That's good stuff. That's
Yep.
good stuff.
That's
Okay,
good
let's
stuff.
go ahead and get started here. And
All right.
for I think what feels like the first time this season, we have everybody together for the full 3 hours. So this is wonderful. How you doing tonight, Father Chris? Great to see you back home again. Can you hear us, Father Chris? I can hear something playing there, but I don't hear you.
I think he's having
Looks like
audio issues.
He's having audio issues. Okay, Brandon, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How about you?
We are fantastic. We're here. We're plugging along, and I'm getting ready for this episode. I can't wait. Let's see. Father Chris looks like he's having audio issues. You back yet, Father?
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah,
Hey,
there you
welcome.
are.
Okay.
glad you're
That's
back.
so weird.
Could you hear us the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah, that's weird. I basically didn't do anything.
It's because you're down under.
Gremlins in the lines
Yeah,
again.
it's true. What?
You're on the wrong part of the world. That's the problem.
It's a true story. It's true. I'm either in somewhere in the British Isles where the reception is great, but it's like silly o'clock in the morning. I've got to go first thing, or I'm down under where the reception's terrible, but I've got all the time in the world.
All the time in the world.
But I was saying I'm drinking something really smoky tonight. It's Lapsang Souchong tea.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Russian Caravan by T2, so I do recommend it.
Sounds like a good tea. Yeah.
That does sound fantastic.
Yeah.
Nothing like a good tea, definitely. Well, it's great to have you back here tonight and this morning for you. But it's going to be an interesting time, as it always is when we do open lines, open topics, because we go down the rabbit hole and there's all sorts of tangents, and we have no idea where we're going to end up when it's all said and done. So let's get started, I guess, with questions from the ether. Brandon, what do you have for us this evening?
All right. So the first question comes from Tiffany. I was just wondering what the church's thoughts are on alkaline hydrolysis. I was initially interested in it when I passed, but found out that they still have to grind your bones. I just don't want any part of me to be left sitting or turned into objects ever. But is the water itself enough to dissipate the residual spiritual energy?
Okay, alkaline hydrolysis. Well, let's look at it from a few vantage points here. Let's look at it from the scientific vantage point. Let's look at it from the religious, theological, and let's look at it from the metaphysical. Okay, so we'll go in that order. So from the scientific vantage point, it's something that's up and coming, and it's apparently environmentally friendly. So it's got people today interested in it because everybody's gone in this green kick, and this is something that is efficient and environmentally friendly. So there's benefits in that respect. As far as the religious spiritual side of things go, as far as the church goes, the Orthodox Church hates it. Of course, they hate cremation too, so this would be no different. The Roman Catholic Church, though, is kind of on the fence. It's kind of half and half. Some see it as just a neutral thing. Some see it as somewhat problematic. The more traditionally the Catholic, the more problematic they tend to see it. So what is alkaline hydrolysis? Well, it's basically a chemical process for disintegrating the organic parts of a corpse. And all that's typically left are the teeth and bones, which has to be ground up. Now, the problem with it in terms of what Tiffany's question is that if you're looking at alkaline hydrolysis as a means to assure that there's no remaining part of you, this is not going to be any more effective than standard cremation. Because there are still cremains, they still call them cremains, and that ground up bone and teeth is
in the cremains.
And that is usually passed on to the family to keep or dispose of as they see fit, in the same way that they would with ashes. So honestly, if you're concerned about your body being kept or utilized in some way, then really the safest way is good old fashioned standard Christian burial. Because unless you're a grave robber, you're not going to really have to worry too much about somebody using your corpse in some way. Whereas with cremation, the remains are given typically to the family, and alkaline hydrolysis is the same for that. Okay, so what is residual will stay. So the other part of our question is the washing away process through this type of procedure enough to break any kind of metaphysical connection? So let's talk about the metaphysics of it. Okay. Well, metaphysically speaking, okay, it's fine as long as the intent there is in the same vein as cremation, which is to is to give the means for that particular spirit to break whatever remaining attachment it has to its physicality. Now, if you are really worried about this, then you don't need to worry about cremation and alkaline hydrolysis. The rite of Christian burial is more than sufficient to help that along. That's why the spiritual process and procedure, the ritual itself, is in place and has been in place by the church for more than 1,000 years as a means to be able to deal with the afterlife care of the individual. Okay. And this culminates with the entire process of the funeral, which is not a woe is me party for the living. We've talked on.
Supposed to be.
It's not supposed to be, and we've talked about that on the show before. But that's what a lot of churches and basically the modern funeral industry has turned it into, this kind of woe is me party, and that is absolutely counterproductive to the helping that spirit move on. The rites of the church, however, are all about that. It's all about helping that spirit to recognize what their condition is and to guide them towards the presence of God. Because some people, unfortunately, particularly more so these days than in times past, are dying in a state of unpreparedness, and they are not dying well. We've talked about the need to die well on this show before, and this is one of those examples. When you don't die well, what happens is you tend to stay attached to what is familiar, and that's where things can go wrong in the metaphysical / paranormal sense. So when you start seeing hauntings and attachments, spirit attachments, the spiritual degradation, evil spirits, this kind of phenomenon can be traced back to a lack of dying well. Okay, because most evil spirits, or what we call evil spirits, are not demons in the fallen angel sense. They are
Wrathful.
They are wrathful spirits. They are spirits that have do not know how to move on. They have not been given the tools to know how to move on. And the dying process is not an automatic thing. I think sometimes, again, through the errors of Protestantism, it's been taught that, you die and Jesus immediately comes to your rescue and brings you home. It'd be nice if that's the case, but that's not the case, because just because you're dead doesn't mean all of a sudden, the relationship's now ready to begin. I mean, if you haven't been fostering that relationship in life, it's not going to be there in death. It's the same, you have to have this process go. This is why church is necessary. It's not something you can arbitrarily decide to do. It is a necessary part of the process. Salvation is an effort. It isn't an automatic thing, and it isn't something that you take for granted. And our culture does all of that today. It takes it for granted, dismisses it as unimportant, and then when you're finally dead and you realize, oh shit, I don't know what to do, it's too late by that point. And now you're really in trouble. So what ends up happening is your fear takes over, and you will attach to what's familiar. That means friends, family, home where you place objects where you live, things that you were comfortable with, and then your spirit slowly disintegrates over time, or degrades, I should say, over time, breaking down into its core properties, which at this point is just whatever its core emotion is, and typically that's going to be either fear or anger, or sadness. It could be one of those three primarily, and sometimes all three at the same time, because it all kind of stems from the same source anyway. So what does the rites of the church do? The rites of the church help to move that spirit on, to let them recognize God is still available and God loves you, and this is what you need to do now. Accept that, allow yourself to be accepted into the presence of God, because one of the major things that causes spirit attachment outside of the usual is that a lot of people are dying today feeling unworthy. They don't feel, this is the other side of the coin with religion. Okay, there's a dark side to religious practice too, and that's scrupulosity, and that comes with an idea that you're never going to be good enough. And so when they die, they're sometimes afraid to face God. They believe in judgment, but they're afraid to face it because they don't feel that they've been good enough. They don't feel that God could love them, and sometimes that keeps them.
Some people are taught their whole lives that they're an abomination for the way they love, or the way they look, or the way they act.
Yep.
And so that instills a institutional fear in you.
It does. And so this is another thing that can lead to spirit attachment and hanging around, lingering around, and turning into, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. And so the rites of the church are there to prevent this from happening. And severing your connection to the physical is how this works. Now, cremation is great for this, as long as it also follows the same pattern of rites. Now, so if you're doing it in the cultures where cremation is their primary way of dealing with death, like Hinduism, for example, there's a beautiful ritual involved in that. Some of them would be seen as morbid to people in the West, but they are wonderful methods for helping the spirit to move on. Buddhism has wonderful ways too, and we've talked about some of the more extreme versions, like the Tibetan sky burial, and having the meat hacked off the bones and fed to the vultures. Unthinkable to us today, probably illegal in this country, but in fact, I'm pretty sure it is.
I would almost bet on that.
I'd almost bet on it, but yet beautiful and wonderful for the spirit. Okay. But cremation isn't an automatic thing. If there's no ritual involved in it, then it's not really doing any good for the spirit. In fact, it could be terrifying for the spirit. So think about this. Think about, you're still attached, and the only thing that you're comfortable with or familiar with is your own body, and you don't really know you're dead. But all of a sudden now you're being, either an autopsy is being performed on you, you're being filled with embalming fluid and buried in the ground, you're being burned up in a crematorium or thrown into an alkaline hydrolysis chamber. These would be terrifying experiences because the spirit doesn't know it's dead. And all it would, and it doesn't have the benefit of the logic of the human brain, because the human brain's no longer working. The brain is dying too. So all you've got now is the raw instinct, and the raw instinct is very childlike. So think about it in that sense, that you don't know what's going on. You're only experiencing it, and you're confused because you don't have your normal faculties of awareness to work with. It's pure terror, and it's a terrible way to die. And this is pretty much what we're doing today to almost everybody, because they've lived their whole life not finding any value in religion, and then they're utilizing secular methodology for dealing with death. And all of that is a recipe for absolute disaster when it comes time to face it. So, so to get back to Tiffany's question, if we want to, use, or if we're wanting to find a method that would prevent any chance of anybody ever keeping body parts, or having ashes turned into diamonds that people wear around their neck, or some stupid crap like that, then Christian burial is going to be your best bet, because that should be where it's all being handled by the church. The proper rituals are being performed, the proper procedures are being done for the dead, prayers for the dead, which are absolutely essential and necessary in this context. And then your body is being put to rest on holy ground where it will not be disturbed. So that is the ideal thing. And even if at some point, like you hear sometimes these cemeteries are, a church is sold and somebody builds a neighborhood on top of a cemetery, they only move the headstones. That really does happen. We actually had a case not too long ago where we suspect this happened. It's like poltergeist, but it really does happen. And, if it's all done correctly, the rite of Christian burial, then even if that were to be the case, where somebody were to build a house on top of, your grave, it wouldn't really cause too much issue, because the attachment has been severed and that spirit has moved on, or what they would call in I guess the paranormal field as crossing over. So, that's really what you need to look at. But I mean, I guess the church is kind of against it for the most part, or more cautiously against it, I guess you could say, because it can be looked at as being disrespectful to the body. And remember, the body is a holy thing. It's the temple of the Holy Spirit. It is a sacred vessel, and it's to be properly cared for, even in death. And then there's also the theology of the resurrection of the dead, where, you will return to this body. And disrespecting it at any point sort of dishonors the entire process of the Christian life. So, I mean, I guess it's up to your own personal morality whether or not you find things like cremation and alkaline hydrolysis to be disrespectful. I personally do not, but I do find any kind of secular methodology problematic, because it's not helping the spirit to move on, which is really what the rites, the funeral rites and the funeral industry is supposed to be about. But now it's about making money, selling $50,000 coffins because they preserve your body an extra 50 years. That's what it's all about today. And it's a nasty business. It's a sick business.
And don't go putting your loved one's ashes in tattoo ink and get a tattoo.
Oh man, that's the worst thing you could do.
That was a big thing 10, 15 years ago.
I think it still is.
Dear God, do not do that.
Well, they're putting it to jewelry and everything else. But I don't know, Father, what are your thoughts personally on alkaline hydrolysis? Do you have any strong opinions on it, or do you kind of, which side do you fall on?
I think my first response was, why you ask, why is that a question for you in terms of, what's going on what do you think a life is, and what do you think death is, and what do you think happens when you die? Yeah. These are the questions but I think you've done a very good job of explaining really the answer to those questions. I think I would say a couple of things, one of which a lot of people don't consider, quite rightly out of humility. I'll come to that in a second. But I would say, I think the orthodox hesitation about anything other than Christian burial is that, God created you. So your body belongs to God. It's the same reason suicide is not acceptable in the Christian church. Right. Because your life is not yours to take. It's God's that God has given you that life.
Right.
God has given you this body, and so now natural decay is in the hands of God. but to take action. Now, I'm probably less concerned about cremation than some people, although I am still, I don't want to be cremated. Okay, I want to be buried.
Right.
But I think, the church would say, well, certainly the Roman Catholic Church would say, cremation is fine so long as that cremation has no religious significance. In other words, like you said, the same rites, the same processes, the same theology and spirituality is the means by which we consider Christian rights. And so if it happens to be cremation, then that's okay. If that's the method of disposing, I think, you described in Hinduism, in Buddhism, it has a different significance. And I think that's where the church would be, the official line of the church would be uneasy, is to say that if we're saying that those rites can supplant the Christian rites of burial or cremation, then the answer would be no. But I think the other thing I wanted to mention was, and it goes back to the reflection on why do you ask that question? I think my concern is that perhaps, and I don't know the person that's asked the question, so but I could say one reason to ask a question in that way would be that that one might have a very negative view of the human body or of their own human body. Mm-hmm. Just to kind of make people think a bit differently about that, it's possible that in the fullness of time, the church may consider you a saint.
Yeah.
And
you've deprived us all of your relics.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I have in my house relics of St. Augustine of Hippo. I have relics of St. Vincent de Paul. And that would not be possible if they'd have been obliterated, for lack of a better word. So, it could also be that you're stealing an opportunity of grace for the future.
Yeah.
And that's just something that, that's the only thing that you didn't cover, really.
I think it's also important to note that the Roman Catholic Church, you kind of touched on it, but I want to make it clear for the audience's sake, is that the Roman Catholic Church is okay with cremation provided that the rites of Christian burial are still performed. So that does not give you license to go and get cremated and then go and keep those ashes in an urn on your mantle for all eternity.
Correct.
You have to still go through the funeral process, and those ashes need to be buried. Those cremains are still considered remains. I don't like the term cremains because it assumes they're now something different. They are still the corpse. It is still the corpse. It might not stink and rot away anymore, which makes it a nice, safe thing to keep in your home in people's minds, but it isn't a nice, safe thing to keep in your home. Your home is not a graveyard. Your home is not a tomb. And you should be properly handling
countless examples of why not to do that.
We do. I'm very much against it, and I get very frustrated with people when they're like, they tell me that they have it, and it's like, well, you need to take care of it, and they'll tell me, oh yeah, I know I do, and then like 2-3 months later, how'd that go? Oh, I still haven't done anything with it. Well, it's like
I'm really blunt. I mean, people tread on eggshells. Understandably, it's difficult, if someone's lost someone, especially if someone's lost someone young, and they've got this attachment. But of course, that kind of attachment is not a healthy one. And so, but I'm pretty blunt. If I see an urn on a mantelpiece, I just say, right, so when am I going to bury that then?
I like that.
And I'm sure not everybody likes me. I know they don't, but
we'll have to do that next investigation we have. I'll say it to
I just think let's make it really clear.
Yeah.
When am I going to bury that then?
Yeah.
In other words, it shifts it from should we bury it to when am I going to be ready to bury it?
Yep.
That's which is a different conversation.
I've even done it with people's pets. I mean, they'll keep the ashes of the pet, and I still, even though that doesn't require any kind of rite of Christian burial, it is still a severing of the spirit to that, to those ashes. And that is something that is always a good thing to do, because any spirit that is lingering in an attachment, it acts as a beacon or a magnet for other things. And if there's something malevolent in the vicinity of wherever that attachment is happening, then something malevolent can come in. So I always tell people, think of ashes as a magnet for basically anything. So the people are usually terrified of Ouija boards, and they're like, did you close the session? Did you close the session? It's like, well, when you have ashes in your home, it's like opening a session and never closing it. It's like a permanent Ouija board right there on your fireplace mantle. Not a good idea. Okay. And, you need
but also psycho-spiritually not healthy.
No, it's not.
Like I say, it's totally understandable.
Mm-hmm.
So please, people should understand that I understand why. But whether you are a materialist that just thinks psychology is the most important thing, it's not healthy for that, and it's certainly not healthy spiritually, because really, it's almost as though we're claiming ownership of a life of somebody just because and because they're special to us, but actually they're God's life. Sorry to interrupt, but as soon as you said pets, look what's happened.
Oh,
yeah, I saw your little kitty walking in the background there.
You got a little cat there.
Yeah. So you saw that one there.
Yeah.
But also this one.
You're surrounded.
Spiritual conversation. They come out of the woodwork.
They do. Anytime you do anything spiritual, cats have to be there right in the middle of it. They can sense it. They can feel it. So, Brandon, I think that answers the question as well as we can. I don't know if you have any follow-up to that.
I don't have any, or there was a follow-up question that Not Sure had to that question. Let me go back and find it. That was a little bit
I've got
ago.
it, Brandon. It says, where do shadow people come into this whole, that's another different phenomenon, isn't it?
Well, I mean, look, shadow person is not one thing. Right. All right. They try to make it one thing, and they try to make it scary. But the reality is that any kind of incorporeal being can appear as what we would see as a shadow person. So it could be literally anything. It can be anything from the most benign ghost or apparition, a one-time deal, something just passing through, right down to a fallen angel. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to be able to manifest any kind of visual, to produce a visual manifestation on the visual spectrum. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that.
Especially to the naked eye.
Correct. So not most of the time, the best it can muster, these things can manifest just what is just a dark mass that you barely can see in the corner of your eye. Your periphery might catch it, but that's about it. Sometimes you'll see an actual figure.
That's really what I experienced when I was on the show from Scotland, wasn't it?
In your hotel room,
yeah, you did.
Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I had another experience, by the way, in London, but
seeking you out.
Yeah, I mean, the one in Scotland, I didn't really explain much because I was still trying to figure it out while it was live on air. But there was a kettle, a cordless kettle, and it rotated like that.
Really?
And, so that's kind of what drew my attention, and then this just kind of experience, which is not the first time, not my first rodeo.
Not your first time,
but like I said on air, and it was true. I didn't feel in any way hostile. It just was like, hi.
Yeah. How you doing?
And and like I said, I think it was, I normally bless places and I hadn't, and I think it was going, what's wrong with me? Why not bless me? But when I was in London, we stayed at a place called the King's Wardrobe. This is very English, isn't it? That
very
the King's
English.
Wardrobe was basically it was originally where the king kept his armor and sword and that sort of thing, hence the name wardrobe. But it basically became the king's exchequer. It became his where he kept all his money, his treasury. And in fact, up until the late 18th century, it when the civil list replaced it, it was still bigger than the treasury of the United Kingdom. So it was there, and then it burnt down in the Great Fire of London, and was then rebuilt. And so we were staying in these apartments. So you can imagine this is probably amongst the most haunted place in England. I mean, it's right in the square mile next to St. Paul's Cathedral, inevitably there's a kind of sense of this just. There's spirits everywhere because the place is built on generations of dead bodies.
Oh my God, yes.
and so
and in a very condensed area too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's literally built. It's literally built on a. There's a blue plaque to say, "Oh, this was the the graveyard of whatever church it was."
Yeah.
And in the middle of the night, we had a TV we were in an apartment. We had a TV in our bedroom, which we didn't use the whole time we were there. And in the middle of the night, it just came on.
That sounds like a wonderful place to stay.
I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Road trip.
Yeah, it just came on.
Yeah.
Did you said you did some blessings, right? Did you find that it calmed down after that?
So the one in Scotland, certainly, I didn't really have any other experience there after, because I blessed it that night. As soon as I got off the show,
yeah.
Yeah. I thought, well, I'm not going to wait. I didn't wake Jen up. She slept through it. But and then, but the one in London, not really. I mean, I kind of. I did after my experience in Edinburgh. I thought, well, I'll bless every place I go. It was a reminder to me.
Yeah.
So I did do that. But but other than that, no. I mean, like I say, nothing about that was frightening or terrifying. It's just. Yeah, it's what it is. I think as soon as you're open to experiences like that, they just become more normal.
Absolutely, I feel I feel chills every once in a while just driving down the road. I'll get that that paranormal chill chicken skin thing where I know a spirit's close by, and then I'll see like a memorial cross in the ditch as I'm passing by. It's like, oh, okay. Then I'll just say the eternal rest prayer and keep it moving.
That's right.
It's almost normal for me. If I have somebody in the car with me, they're like, "What was that?" I'm like, "Ah, don't worry about it."
The best thing is always the simple prayer.
The simple prayer. Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Just rest
eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. I mean, that's a very easy prayer to remember, and that's really all you have to do when you suspect that you're in the presence of something that might be unrested or seeking your help. A lot of times they're reaching out to you because they're looking for help.
Yeah.
And if you provide them with the help that they need, then they can respond to that.
We would say that once somebody's died, they can't pray. I mean, obviously, if they become saints in heaven, they can pray for us. But in between times, they can't actually pray, but they benefit from our prayers.
And I think that has to do. We
have a strong sense to pray for the dead.
I think that has to do with the fact that the faculties of logic and reason are gone.
Mm-hmm.
The brain is the seat of this, and until they are made whole again, which is what sainthood is, right? They don't have that. They don't have access to that kind of consciousness. There is no consciousness outside of it. So, ghosts are not conscious. They're aware. There's awareness there. But it's very rudimentary. Consciousness is something that is, you could say it's a quality of the divine. And when we die imperfectly and are not moving in the direction of salvation, then we are moving further away from that divine source. And so we lose more and more each and every time our ability to emulate those properties of the divine: freedom and awareness, consciousness and intention. These are all aspects of God that we possess, but through his grace. But here, while you're in this fallen state, you need a brain to be able to utilize it. And the fallen state exists beyond this as well. It's the spiritual world too. It's also fallen.
Which is a cautionary tale to say to people, you can't wait.
No, you can't.
You can't wait. It matters now.
It does.
Don't put it off.
And people will say, well, why doesn't God come to their rescue? And it's like, well, he has.
He has.
That's what the cross is about. And you were supposed to be paying attention. I mean, it's kind of sad in a way, but it's funny.
He's already sent the lifeboat.
Yeah,
you want to get on it? That's it.
It's like, why isn't God doing anything about the way the world is? He has done something. About
Where have you been?
He did something about it 2,000 years ago. Why is it taking you so long to catch up? But there you go, Brandon. Any other questions relating to this before we move on?
Ghost Squad.
Ghost Squad?
There was one about donate.
Everybody still here?
I don't know. Let's see.
I am.
Yep.
Is it?
We good?
It's been really okay. Father Firth is still there. Levi is still there. Okay, so we're just getting messages that
Crapola.
it looks like OBS reset itself. So maybe that will help. Now I don't know what's going on, but it looks like it's been a really bad connection tonight. But we're still on. We're still live and everything.
Everybody's good. Okay, thank God.
Good
Okay,
deal.
so Ghost Squad Scotland had a question about leaving his body to a training hospital where he would be cremated after they were finished, and he wanted to know your thoughts on that particular basically donating your body to science for medical trainees.
Well, I mean, it's an admirable thing to do from the standpoint of of being, willing to offer yourself for, what would amount to the benefit of others who might need that help, because you're contributing yourself to maybe research that could save lives down the road. Okay, so that's a good thing. The problem, though, is that you would need to assure that whatever you are doing is also done within the framework of some kind of right, some kind of spiritual right that helps your spirit to move on, assuming you need that kind of help. Okay, and so if you have a very deep spiritual life, one that you've cultivated a very strong connection to God, or however you see your spirituality, it doesn't have to be in the Christian sense. I'm not going to be that rigid. Then you might be in a state where you can die, well, regardless of what happens to your body. You're not going to have any attachments. You're going to be prepared, and you're going to know what to do without the help or benefit of the rest of us. That's possible. I mean, certainly high-level lamas in Tibet achieve this without any trouble. That can definitely happen. But you have to be sure, okay, that you don't need these things. And I think most people do need them. And so they're there for you. So I think it is possible, it is possible to perhaps get the help of a priest and have the proper rites done. And then instead of being carted off to the cemetery, you'd be carted off to a hospital, or wherever cadavers would be utilized for medical students or something, and then cremated, and then maybe some condition or provision where the cremated remains are then properly buried. I don't know how that would be arranged. I'm not sure you'd find a church that would be willing to work with you on that. I don't know.
I have been to when I was doing A-level biology, we went to Manchester University where they do this, where medical students operate on cadavers and what have you. And I've got two bits of bad news for Ghost Adventure Scotland. One is that
Ghost Squad. It's Ghost Squad, I think, right?
Sorry, Ghost Squad.
Yeah.
Scotland.
Let's not get in trouble.
Yeah. Sorry about that. But one thing I'd say is certainly by the time, the whole time I was in law enforcement, there are more people wanting to donate their bodies to science than science wants. So you might find it difficult to do that. So although that might be your intention, there's actually more supply than demand when it comes to that.
That's interesting.
Which is not a surprise.
Interesting.
Not a surprise, given how secular the UK is. It's not that surprising because, like you said, there's a noble thing in doing that, and most people are decent, and so anyway. But the other thing is that in terms of how remains are dealt with in the long term, an image that I can't wash out of my mind is of obviously it was a man whose head, neck, and torso were just in a glass box with his nose pressed up to the glass like that.
Oh, geez.
And from what I can tell, that's how he's going to be he'd been there for probably 40 years, and that was probably how he's going to be left for another 40 years at least. So I'm not sure what's edifying about that. I suspect that the vast majority of people that want to donate their bodies to science don't really think that that's what they're going to be used for.
I think that's the part. I mean, part of the problem is I wouldn't necessarily trust the scientific community because you're largely today dealing with the religion of atheists. And that's what it's become. And, they're not going to have any motivation to show respect for or care for your spiritual nature because they don't even believe you have one. So I'm not sure, as admirable as it is, I'm not sure it's necessarily a advisable thing, particularly for a Christian to do. So I'm very cautious about things like donating one's body to science, donating organs. These are things that do have problematic metaphysical and theological consequences. And I think Christians need to be cautious of that. Any others about this topic? Can we move on to the next one?
I think so.
All right. Brandon, what's our next one?
All right, so our next question comes from Paula. Is it true that once our loved ones have been purified, their love for us is so pure they are able to help our weaknesses? Does this happen by intercession in prayer? Our prayers for them then make them able to intercede on our behalf in the same way?
Okay, so by perfected, we're talking about either somebody who died in a perfect state of grace, which would be someone that, received viaticum and extreme unction and then passed away in a perfect state of grace, in which case they could enter immediately into the kingdom. And then, or if there's a time in purgatory, once that has been completed, then they would be perfected and then could enter into the kingdom. And that is entering into the church triumphant. That is sainthood. So any saint has the ability to do what any other saint can do. It's the full grace of God. It's the full grace of perfection. So saints are saints. And, I think we get sometimes lost in the canonization procedures, but we need to remember most saints are never going to be canonized. Canonization is just recognition, formal recognition by the church. But anybody that has entered into the kingdom of heaven is a saint, is in the church triumphant, and has all of the privileges and abilities of what sainthood provides. So yes, the answer to the question is absolutely yes. Somebody that is perfected is truly a saint and can perform anything that a saint could do. Now, there is one caution here. That is not a license to pray to your relatives just because you believe that they've made it to heaven. That's not what the church is advising here by this understanding. The reason canonization is important is because this is the church saying, we have assurance through our investigation, which is quite extensive, by the way, more than I think a lot of people realize. We have assurance,
and weighted against saying no too.
It is. Oh yes, they do.
Yeah.
They try to disprove it. Honestly, so it's almost like a court case, really. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt, kind of thing.
In the Western Church, it's a bit different in the East.
Oh, in the East, they just declare it. Yeah, it's very simple in the East. It's like all things in the East. They make it quite simple in those respects. But in the West, it's a very formal process. And it's the church saying that we have assurance that this person has attained to sainthood and is somebody that can be venerated. It is somebody that can, that you can request the prayers of. We say pray to. It's kind of a misnomer. We talked about that last time. We don't
pray with.
Yeah, we don't pray to saints, even though that's the colloquial way of saying it. You're asking them for prayers. You're asking them to pray with you. It's the church triumphant. So you're just asking another member of the church, somebody who's in a much better position, to pray with and for you or whoever needs the prayer.
And somebody who doesn't need to sleep.
Yes, exactly. Can pray it without ceasing, as we're supposed to.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the weakness of human frailty to deal with and contend with. So it's a wonderful understanding when you really know what's going on here. But yes, any loved one who has attained to this condition has those abilities. So even though we can't pray to our loved ones just because we want to, hope and project that they made it to heaven, we can we can have the assurance that those of those relatives of ours who are in the kingdom are indeed praying for us and looking out for us, because that is what the church triumphant is there to do. They are part of the church, and they will remain part of the church until we are all one again. At the end of time, there won't be need for the church. The church will dissolve at the end of time, and when the new kingdom, when the new heaven and the new earth are ushered in, then the church has completed its purpose. But for right now, as long as the three stages of the church triumphant, those in heaven, the church suffering, those in purgatory, and the church militant, those of us working out our salvation now, as long as that is still, as long as the church suffering and the church militant need help, then the church triumphant will be there to help them. And that includes everybody who's made it. And so the canonized...
Before the Orthodox amongst us start complaining about purgatory, I'll just mention two words: toll houses.
The Orthodox pray for the dead as well, and I like to explain it to them. Just don't get lost in any of the technicalities and the legalisms of the term purgatory. Mm-hmm. Just understand that the dead need our prayers, and when we pray for those in purgatory, it's the same spirit in which the Orthodox are praying for the dead. It's the same exact reason. Yeah. So basically the answer to the question is yes.
All right. And our last question, it's similar to the first one in a way. Would you be able to give any advisements on donating plasma?
Okay.
A Jehovah's Witness has asked this question.
I think this is Brandon's question, actually. The church doesn't really have a problem with that. And metaphysically, there are some potential short-term consequences, just like donating an organ, which has long-term consequences, metaphysically. There is... your blood, even if you're, let's say you're in a, God forbid, in a serious accident and you lose a lot of blood. I
had 20 units of blood.
So there you go. So Jamie had donated blood, right. But none of that donated blood is in her today because it's all been recycled out through. Her own blood has eventually replaced it. So you don't keep it like you do an organ.
It took me a long time to feel like me again, just full disclosure.
But you could tell that there was something different.
I could tell that I was weaker. I just did not feel right. It took about 2 years for me to feel like me again.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand. I mean, I hear that story, and it's the same thing with people that get donated.
I was pretty much emptied out.
Yeah, you were in bad shape.
Yeah.
But I can't say that it's not doing any good because she wouldn't be here today if there had not been donated blood or plasma,
God bless
to be
every
able
one
to.
Of them. Yep.
But at the same time, there are short-term possible metaphysical consequences where there is an enmeshment between donor and recipient for a period of time. With organ donation, it can last for the duration of that those energies become intermingled forever. With blood, it's only for the time that the blood is circulating through the body, which is not very long. I think, I'd have to go check. I don't remember exactly how long. I think it's 2 or 3 months.
It's not as though until that moment, Jamie had been filled up with blood at birth, and then that was the same blood just going around the body.
Correct.
Right.
It's more about the archetypal energy of the life, because look, metaphysically, blood is the river of life. Okay, so there's a connection between our blood flow and our spirit. And even to a certain degree, there's a connection between blood and the soul. It's part of the reason why.
And sin.
Yes, exactly.
Sin is in the blood.
It is in the blood, yes. And so when you take on someone else's blood and put it into you, you're taking on that energy. The only consolation I can give is that it's temporary. Because again, like I said, once you've build your strength back up and your body starts producing normally again, that blood gets recycled out with your own. So you're always creating new blood cells, and that eventually is washed away. But there is a temporary short-term enmeshment that happens there for good or for evil. And like I said,
as an aside, here in Australia, because I'm from the UK and I lived there between, I think it was like 1980 something and 90 something. Until very recently, they wouldn't let us give blood in Australia because of the mad cow disease.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
And so, but I always used to say, it's just because British blood's just too powerful for them.
That it is.
Can't take it.
Have a blowout. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, that would be. Somebody would take over the world with all that British blood. You know what I mean? But so. I wouldn't. I think I think that kind of thing has to come down to a person's personal convictions. If it's something you feel that you should do for the good of others, and you're willing to take on the temporary metaphysical risks that could come with it, then by all means go ahead and do it. Remember, the recipient is more vulnerable than the donor, metaphysically. Okay. Spiritually or theologically, religiously, there's really not much of a problem. I don't think either the Church of Rome or the Orthodox churches have a problem with blood donation. I don't think they do. Organ donation's a different matter, though. Some are against it, some are okay with it. It really depends on the individual bishops. But I don't think anybody has really a ruling against blood donation. I'm talking strictly from a metaphysical vantage point. You have to be cautious.
Only Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah. And I wouldn't consider Jehovah's Witness to be a Christian denomination. I'm sorry, but they're not.
They're not Christian.
No, you have to accept the Nicene Creed to be a Christian. I mean, that's bottom line. So it's not to criticize Mormons or Jehovah's Witness or Seventh-day Adventists or these other groups. I'm not trying to pin you out and say, you guys are not Christians because you believe differently. It's not that. I mean, it is to a degree. It's because you decided to reject the Council of Nicaea, and no Christian has that luxury and still call themselves Christian. You're not Christian anymore. When you move away from the teachings of the church, you are no longer Christian. So fortunately, Protestants are not that far astray. So that gives me hope, because the Protestant churches all agree with the tenets of the Nicene Creed. They do. And that's really that's what matters. Honestly, you can get into all this stuff about
bizarrely, even the Filioque, bizarrely.
Yeah, it's true. They're very happy with it.
It's very papal, but there you go.
There you go. So I think what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and take our top of the hour break. We'll be back in just a moment while we can go and get ourselves recalibrated for the next 2 hours, where we start taking more of your questions from the chat, and you can call into the show. We're looking forward to hearing from you tonight. Don't go away. Welcome back, everybody, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. Tonight, it is open lines, open topics, and you are the guest. When we come back here, we'll start taking your questions from the chat room, as well as giving you the number to call into the show if you'd like to speak directly to any one of us with a question, comment, or story. We'd love to hear from you. I also have one more question from the ether that I feel we should address and talk about. So we'll deal with that when we come back here first, and then we'll jump right in to your questions. Stay tuned. Well, I do apologize, everybody. I think the problem this time was me. I had something running in the background that I didn't realize was still running. It was something that I have to do at the beginning of the show to get it started, and it was still on, and it shouldn't have been, and it was drawing bandwidth. I've noticed that since I've turned it off, it is now stabilizing right where we kind of need it to be in about the 4,600 kilobytes per second range, which is pretty good for this internet connection out here. So I think it was my fault, but fortunately we did not lose our connection over a mistake on my part. I do apologize for that error. Okay, so here's what I wanted to address, because I think it's a question that might be relevant. I'm not going to share the name of the person who sent this, but I am going to read the email. Okay. So he says, "Hi, hope you are well. I'm getting married, and a concern we have is about birth control. I know we had briefly talked about this years ago, but wanted to know what your advice or opinions are. We are obviously only looking at preconception options, but don't really know what is the best option, be it IUDs or pills. I'm getting contradictory information from all over, and my biggest concern, of course, would be to upset the Lord. If you can shed any light on this, I'd greatly appreciate it." Okay, so here's the situation. Okay, whether you're dealing with birth control or IUDs, they're all basically considered to be abortifacient agents, or have at least the potential to be. Okay. If they're working perfectly, then chances are they're not going to act in that capacity, but there's always the risk that they could. And even if you're using non-hormonal forms, there is still the risk that there's fertilization without implantation, okay, which is also very problematic because life begins at conception. So birth control can be problematic from a moral vantage point because of those risks. So what is a married couple to do? Because clearly, in today's world in particular, we can't be walking around with 20 kids. Would not be an efficient thing or a financially reasonable thing. And then there's also the responsibility one has to being able to provide a decent life. And you can't do that if you have, extending outside your financial means. So unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church in the Orthodox Church is very close behind in the same ballpark. Their positions are going to be, Orthodox has one more caveat, and they're a little bit more reasonable, and we tend to follow the Orthodox in these kinds of matters. But let's start with the Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholic Church would say that you got two options: abstinence and natural family planning. Okay. And abstinence might be a decent short-term solution, but certainly not healthy for a marriage. Okay, that's because then you can start to fall into a path of sin.
A big problem in a marriage.
It's not allowed in marriage. It's not allowed.
It's not.
In marriage, there is no abstinence. Yeah. Natural family planning is a different thing, but abstinence is not allowed in marriage.
It's not okay. It's not.
You're breaking your vows.
Well, I mean, because there is, of course, one of the conditions that make annulment very easy in the Roman Catholic Church is whether or not there was ever sex. If there was never any sex in the marriage, then there was no marriage as far as the church is concerned. That is the necessary final part to the sacrament. Okay, so it's not just going to the church. It's not just the priest being the witness. It's not just exchanging your vows to each other. It's also coming together in sexual union that makes the sacrament possible. So, as Father Chris said, abstinence is really not an option. Now, if you need to abstain, from excessive sexual activity, that is part of the natural family planning kind of thing. The Orthodox Church pretty much agrees with the Roman Catholic Church on this, with the exception that it allows for there to be, with the pastor's guidance, the use of birth control under certain circumstances, like if there's health issues or health reasons, then under pastoral guidance, the Orthodox Church can be permissive of it, but you have to go to your pastor in order to get this kind of I don't want to call it permission because it's not permission. It's about going under spiritual guidance so that you're doing it correctly is what it is. So that
that's pretty much the Orthodox way, right? I mean, it's an internet meme, really. For Orthodox people, ask your priest. Anyone asks a question, go and ask your priest. Because your priest knows you and your circumstances, and that's why that's the proper place.
Yes,
it's almost like the Jewish rabbi relationship. The idea is that the priest is the altus Christus where you are, and therefore responds to your specific circumstances and knows you inside out, which is why if you just went to see a random Orthodox priest, he'd just say, I don't know you.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Go see your priest.
Yeah, go see your priest. And that's what I basically did advise because, this, I did pastor this individual. I don't really anymore. And so they need to, as a married couple, need to go to the church where they're usually, to get married in the church, you have to go through some kind of premarital counseling to prepare for the sacrament. And that's the time to address these kinds of questions and ask how to go about it. Personally, I left it with this, and this is how I counsel on this. I mean, there could be people that disagree with me on this. Father, you might be one of them. I don't know. But my position on this is that ultimately, the use of birth control has to be something that is done, a decision that is made through one's conscience. It is not something that any church authority or dogmatism can dictate to you and say, thou shall not use this, or that, it has to be something that is made through one's conscience. And so that's where it needs to be left. And so I suggest that you need to talk to your pastor, you need to talk to your confessor and your marriage premarital counselor, and sort of figure out what the best course of action is for you, because there is no easy answer here. I do understand having a lot of children when you're not ready for it, particularly when you're young and you're early starting out in your marriage. Having kids can be devastating to it. I get that. And that definitely would not be a good thing, to put yourself on unnecessary financial harm, or could be so much stress that the marriage fails because of it. So there's a lot of factors to consider here. But at the same time, there's a joke that we used to have in seminary, because of we would be taught to teach about natural family planning and rhythm method and all this stuff. And there was a joke that said, what do you call Catholics that use the rhythm method? And the answer is parents. Yeah. It doesn't, in the long term, it doesn't work. Did she do that in the chat? Yeah. She knows that joke. It's kind of true. You have to, it's not foolproof. But intimacy, sexual intimacy, is a necessary part of the sacrament of matrimony, and is long-term, ongoing, essential part of the sacrament of matrimony.
So, Not Sure has a question, caveat to that, because he's injured. He says, "Well, what does that mean for people who are married and one of the persons is disabled?"
As long as they're open to the miracle of birth, then there's no problem with it, because the idea here is to not play God. That's right. The idea. Ultimately, that's what what the church is trying to help people to understand about this. It's not the church trying to be like, let me get in your bedroom and make sure you're doing everything the right way.
Well, medieval times.
How old were Abraham and Sarah? How old are Abraham and Sarah when they conceived?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, because it's always the question asked. What are two 80-year-olds getting married? Don't be ridiculous. Well, no, all things are possible to God. So although things may be more or less likely, as far as we understand human biology, all things are and as long as people are open to that,
and that's all that the church asks, is that we're open to it. It's not being capable of it, just being open to it.
I think you're right about it being, I'm not an absolutist on contraception at all. I think if people really closely read Humanae Vitae, the encyclical on this matter, mm-hmm. I think a very close reading of that, and I think it should be done with your priest, a very close reading of that would not suggest that somebody who, experiences multiple miscarriages as a result of their own physiology or whatever it may be. I think a very close reading of that would suggest that under certain circumstances, even the Roman Catholic Church mm-hmm. Would allow a form of contraception. So I'm not an absolutist on that, but I do want to put a major caveat on this, which is that the Western world is dying. We're not replacing ourselves, no. And so currently, I think even in the USA, especially in Europe, we are not replacing ourselves. We're having fewer than 2 children mm-hmm. per couple. And this ties in with the whole climate cult and the Gaia worship, and as though humans are a blight on the face of the earth and ought to die out. So I do think there's been a war on reproduction, which I think the church should rightly resist. Mm-hmm. Even Pope Francis, as kind of liberal as he appears to be on some issues, or is presented to be on some issues, I think it's
probably more presented.
Anyway. But he has very recently, had to go at Italians for not having enough children, and Pope Benedict did likewise before him. I mean, that's their role as the Bishop of Rome. That's they're the Italy's their business, mm-hmm. And so I do think that it's a real concern for me that people are not having enough children. And yes, to be sure, economic factors have driven this. the two income household, two income trap, all of that. I'd just say something though about having multiple children that you might struggle to make ends meet to pay for. If you have 10 children, when they grow up, they all get jobs and earn money.
Yeah,
You
eventually
might find yourself better off.
You might be better off
in the long run.
unless you just produce a family of losers, then you could be in real trouble.
So, not to interrupt, but not sure. His question was kind of going the other direction, and not sure. This is pretty personal, so props to you for putting it out there.
Yeah.
He says, I cannot hold my wife like she wants, and she said she has thought about stepping out on the marriage. So maybe he's asking kind of for a counsel on that particular issue, which I think that's more of a her problem than a you problem.
I mean, it does sound like that. It's hard to say. I mean, that's something where you definitely need to start looking at some kind of marital counseling. I mean,
because these are injuries I'm assuming happened to you when you're in the service. I don't know if you're together then or not. That's none of my business. But marriages for rich or poor, sick or healthy.
Yeah,
Look,
better or worse.
I agree. I mean, I think not sure you should deal with that obviously offline and with somebody who's
right
able to meet with both of you and talk that through. I think that's essential. I would say though, if the question is there if there's a physiological reason why
they can't be intimate the way
well
the
then no the question is, does that negate a marriage? No, it doesn't. No. Of course it doesn't.
No.
If I become a paraplegic tomorrow, it doesn't mean I'm not married anymore.
Right.
Right. But of course, that's like saying, well, the analogy I like to make is, man is a two-legged creature. Now, there are one-legged men, but man is a two-legged creature. So, in other words, just because there are exceptions to the norm doesn't mean the norm doesn't exist. And so yeah, okay. The ideal and perfection of marriage is a sexual union between two people. But if for physiological reason, and look, hey, I don't know what happens to all people as they age, but maybe some get more rampant. But I suspect that it becomes less frequent. The centurions amongst us are perhaps living largely celibate lives together. Does that negate the marriage? Absolutely not.
No,
it does not.
It's about being open and not restricting the movements of the Holy Spirit in your life. Is really what it comes back down to. And, obviously that's going to be different for each and every one of us. But I highly, in this particular case, would advise marital counseling.
Absolutely.
And you need to talk through with a counselor what those specific issues are and figure out how they can be.
And don't hold anything back.
Yeah, you can't. Well, not in that kind of situation.
You have to be absolutely honest.
And if you are religious, if you're spiritual, if you go to church, then that is a good thing to get pastoral counseling on, because it is absolutely part of the pastoral life, is to be able to. This is one of the tragedies, I think, of the celibate priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church, is that one of the absolute duties of a pastor is to be able to counsel a married couple in sexual matters. And when you have a bunch of celibate men who, some of whom might have never even had sex in their life, they're not really well prepared or well equipped outside of the textbook to handle those kinds of matters. They've never experienced them. So this is one place where the Orthodox excel, and the old Catholics, because we have lives, we have children, we have spouses, we're part of the community in the same way that you are. In the Roman Catholic Church, they kind of set them back a bit, and I think that it has its advantages, because there's less distraction and less cost and other things involved.
Well, you're more likely to get a priest's time if you're in a Roman Catholic church.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has a family to bother about, I mean, the Orthodox Church are totally the other way. I mean, it's almost unheard of for a parish priest not to be married.
It is.
They really would rather a parish priest was married.
And I do know that the matushka in the Russian church, they call the wife of the pastor the matushka. She becomes the mother of the church, kind of almost like a archetype of the Virgin Mary in the to the family of the church. And when there are members of the church that have marital issues, it's not uncommon for the pastor and the matushka to get together in those sessions and counsel the couple to couple, and it's very effective. It's very effective to have that kind of thing.
You can relate more.
In the Greek church, they call the presbytera.
Yeah, presbytery. Yeah.
Which basically says, it's not quite, but almost, the female expression of priesthood.
Well, it is, but it is because they do possess, in true Orthodox theology, the wife of the priest does indeed possess a part of his ordination, sacramental grace of the holy orders. She is one of the few who can touch the chalice.
Yeah,
she can touch it. No one else can. The priests, only priests, deacons, anyone in holy orders can touch a chalice. Ushers cannot. Other member, other helpers at the church cannot. But the wife of the pastor can touch the chalice, and that I think is proof positive that there is some kind of special grace there, and that it's presbyter. Presbyter is definitely more than just a nice term or an honorary title. I mean, there's something actual powerful about it, and it's a good thing. So anyway, I wanted to address that. I read that this week, and I meant to say, I wanted to get it out to talk about, because I know that's a question that comes up a lot. I don't think we've been really ever on this show dealt with birth control before, and it's something that I think needs to be talked more about, more openly.
Just to say one final thing on it, which is to say, if the purpose of birth control is because you don't want to commit to a marriage, then no.
Yeah, that's not the proper use of it under any circumstance.
That's not okay. No.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has to do with intentions. This is where I say you got to get back into an examination of conscience. And, one of the things that the Roman Catholic Church does advise in terms of how to deal with sin is that one cannot operate or act outside of one's conscience, which means that even if something is dogmatically a sin, if it violates one's conscience, then that is the greater sin. And this is a very complex mystery, something that's kind of hard, because it's not look, you got to be very careful when you talk about this, because it's not an excuse. You can't be like, oh, well, my conscience says it's okay, so I'm going to do it. That's not what it means. It has to be
you have to cultivate your conscience too.
Exactly. Exactly. There's no loopholes here. But assuming you're being very honest with yourself and honest with God, then your conscience actually is the final authority.
And actually, this is a very simple thing to consider, because, for example, substances are neither good nor bad. Mm-hmm. Alcohol is neither good nor bad.
Right.
Drinking alcohol, therefore, is not a sin. But if in your case, your conscience tells you, if I drink alcohol, I'll become violent or otherwise criminal, mm-hmm. then actually drinking alcohol is a sin for you. It goes against your conscience, and it goes towards participating in cultivating the grounds for you to fall. So, it's a perfectly sensible thing. So that's what we mean by conscience, is to say, the experience of knowing yourself, and holding that self to the standard that God has revealed to you.
Right.
Once you've applied all of your mind and your heart and your soul and your strength to understanding what that is for you, that's the conscience we're talking about, that if you go against is a grave sin.
Right. That's exactly right. And that is necessary. To violate one's conscience is necessary, one of the necessary components to committing mortal sin. Okay, so
if you want to give yourself a psychosis, a neurosis, then that's the best way to go about it. And I say that from experience.
I think we've all been down that road,
no doubt,
one form or another.
No doubt. So okay, so we got lines open now. So if you want to call in, the number to call is 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Enter PIN number 855-4111, 855-4111. That number is now on the screen. And if you're international and would like to call for free, you can call me Skype to Skype. Just dial up Eye of the Seer, EYEOFTHESEER. That will connect you also to our lines, and you can come on the air and ask us directly. But I know Brandon, Jamie, have there been questions that we need to get to already from the chat room while we wait for people to hopefully call in?
Yeah, Brandon, you want to go ahead with Sonny?
Yes. So she had asked this question at the first half of the show, and pretty much the gist of her question is, could you explain if a non-Catholic could be involved in confession and communion?
A non-Catholic, typically speaking, communion, no. Okay. Confession.
Or sometimes communion. Sometimes.
Well, what do you
communion.
mean by that?
Well, it depends if they're baptized or not. So if they're baptized, if they're Christians, the canon law allows for, if through no fault of your own you can't access communion in your own tradition, so let's say we're in Malta and there's no Baptist church, and you go to the Roman Catholic Church, in good conscience you can receive communion. So canon law provides for that. Now, in practice, you'd need to be speaking to the priest before you.
You'd need to get the approval there, and that is where it will likely fall apart in some places, depending upon who you talk to.
But if it's not available to you, think about pioneers. So you go out to Australia, in 1788, and there's only one priest for the whole of the country. He happens to be a Catholic priest. Then actually, it wasn't then, but under the current canon law structures, any person can receive communion from that priest. Any baptized Christian.
Baptism is definitely essential.
But it's not ideal. It's just allowed.
Yeah, and the other problem with it is from the Roman Catholic standpoint, unless the church you're talking about is Orthodox, then nobody really has access to the Eucharist outside of the Orthodox and the Catholics. Because there is no Eucharist no genuine Eucharist in any other church, and Mass of the Lord's Supper is not the Mass. So it gets complicated. Okay, and the general rule is, you cannot just walk yourself into a Roman Catholic Mass as a non-Catholic and just go up and receive as though you're, as a visitor. That is
for a blessing, but
you can go for a blessing, and this is where it can get really confusing, because in the Roman Catholic Church, the way you do this is you cross your arms over your heart, and that will be an indicator to the priest that you're up there for a blessing, but not to receive. But don't go up to the Eucharistic ministers. You have to go to the priest for that. But in the Orthodox Church, this is how you receive. So it can get really confusing depending upon East or West. Okay.
I actually like that.
It is kind of nice.
I like that.
It is. But anyway, yeah, I mean, and in the Orthodox Church, I mean, you really have to be a member to receive there. That even a Roman Catholic would know. The priest has to know
you.
He has to know you.
The priest has to know who you are.
Yeah, they won't.
The expectation is that you make your confession before every single time you take communion.
Exactly, and you'll see it very common in an Orthodox church right before the Divine Liturgy. You'll see people kneeling at the priests, and the priests covering them with the stole, and they're hearing confessions right before the Divine Liturgy starts to get people prepared for it. So
if you were a visitor, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to go to, you'd have to wait outside the iconostasis for the priest to come out and make your confession.
Yep. That's what you would do. So yeah, you would, if you're not a Catholic or Orthodox, depending on which you're going to, and you want to receive in that church, you need to go and have a meeting with that pastor. You can't just walk your way in and just pretend. I mean, you could. no one's going to stop you. And
Would advise against
the
that.
Roman Catholic Church is so prolific that it's not uncommon in the big cities for, people to be visiting or whatever, and to just walk into a church. I mean, I would go church hopping all the time when I was a seminarian. I would go into churches that no one knew who I was and go up to receive.
I thought you were talking about people that weren't baptized Catholic.
No. I'm talking about just being
Sneak one in there,
But there are people that do that.
Yeah, I advise
because
against
no
that.
one's going to stop you. They're not going to be
Right.
like, I don't think I know you, so you can't come. Now, in the Orthodox Church, they will. But in the Roman Catholic Church, they typically will let it's on you, okay? But you really, the respectful thing is to go. Now, for confession, this is not such a particular thing. You can go anytime a church is offering confession. It's usually on Saturday afternoons. Look at the schedule. It's usually online. They'll tell you when they're offering it. You can go in and speak to the priest during these times. And you can just go right up and say, I'm not Catholic, but would you be able to hear my confession? And then, you can start talking. But my feeling on this is, if you're already feeling compelled in such a way to seek out these sacraments, then that I would take very seriously and say, maybe you're being called to the life as a Catholic, and maybe you need to take that as a sign that you're being called to a deeper connection to the church in this way.
I think they are. That's
Yeah.
why the questions.
Yeah. So I think.
So I would say no. Confession is not. I mean, the desire to go to confession is one the Holy Spirit has given to you. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But the correct response, if you're not a Catholic, is the rite of Christian initiation in adults. It's to go to the church and say. I mean, if somebody says to me, I feel like I really want to make my confession, I'd say, thank God. What a grace. Now, what's your story?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get you to that point?
Yeah.
And now, I mean, one of the ones that I find difficult is people who are not baptized.
That's where it becomes challenging. Yeah.
Because then you can't hear their confession, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I do this, which I'm not sure is that kosher, but you'll tell me. I in the Western Church, I basically obviously do the RCIA, a form of RCIA program with them. I then actually hear their confession before baptism, and then I don't absolve them. I baptize them.
I don't think there's. I mean, that's a little unorthodox, but I don't think there's anything invalid there. I mean, it's not a matter of validity. It's just a kind of a unique way of doing it. I mean, I think it's kind of powerful because I do think there is a catharsis that comes with expressing your having to externalize your inner failings. I think that's important to do. So confession is only partially a spiritual release. There is something cathartic about it, physically, in the action of having to externalize and hear yourself say it.
I suspect, by the way, the kosher way of doing this would be to baptize them and then have them make a whole life confession afterwards. I suspect that's the kosher way of doing it. But for me,
I don't know, because I don't know if that. No, I think actually the way you do it is more kosher because baptism removes it all. It
makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, there is no sin to confess after baptism, so it doesn't matter really what you did prior. Baptism washes it all away. So to confess after that would actually kind of suggest that the person doesn't really understand what they just received. So I'd say it's more kosher to do it the way you're doing it, although I think the way that it would be done in the Roman Catholic Church would be to just say, you're going to go to baptism. There is no confession here. Confession will come with everything that happens after baptism. So but I don't think there's anything wrong about the way you're doing it. I wouldn't stop you if I were your bishop. I wouldn't say no, don't do that. Some might though. I don't know. I mean, I think bishops can get pretty I hear up their ass about different things. So.
I mean, the reason I said that is that after baptism, of course, there's always sin after baptism.
Yeah.
That you only really need one sin for absolution to be allowed to be offered.
True.
But then along with that, there is a spiritual discipline of doing whole life confessions from periodically. It's not to say that you don't believe that those things have been absolved already. It's I think it's a good idea if somebody moves churches, for example, they move house and they're going to a new church. It's not a bad idea to do that with your new priest, because then that priest can understand more about your inclinations, your proclivity, your circumstances. So
it is helpful. Yeah, it is, and particularly if a person chooses you as their confessor, and you've worked with them in the long term. Although I do notoriously sort of purge. It's kind of hard for me to remember sins that are confessed to me. I have a real time struggling with that. The only time that it changes is when, like I said, somebody chooses me as their long-term confessor, and they're working through a continuous sinful pattern. Then it obviously stays in my memory because we're working with it together. But if it's just a hit and run confession, which most of them are,
one way to put it.
I don't really remember them. I don't. I mean, no. I'll remember sometimes.
I think it's a grace of orders.
I think it is. I think it is. It's like I don't. Yeah. I don't, and I have a hard time struggling. Like I can remember like certain sins that were confessed to me, but I wouldn't be able to tell you who confessed them.
I think that's part of the grace, allowing you not to have to carry that heavy confession on you.
It's true, because absolution, you do, and in absolution, you feel the release too. Father, you know what I'm talking about, and I mean, only a priest could understand this. But when you absolve, when you get to that point of absolution, it is. I think personally, it is the sacrament that has the strongest feeling.
I agree.
By far.
And it's the difference between therapy and confession.
Yeah.
In therapy, there isn't. I mean, sometimes there's a sort of release of talking cure sort of thing.
Yeah.
But in confession, there's an ending.
There is.
There's now the ritual actually moves from one position to another, and neither of you can deny it. Because we've been on this ritual from River. We've been on this journey together, and so and now we say, right, and here's an end to it, and go and pray for me, a sinner too. There's like the mass. There's an ending to it. There's a spiritual, energetic release.
It's a wiping out. I don't think people realize that confession's not just telling somebody the bad things you've done. It is literally a blotting out as though you've never done them. That's very different than just simply saying, I'm going to go to get this off my chest. Therapy is going to get something off your chest. Absolution is about making it as though it never happened. God removes it from you and all of the consequences that come with it. And that's the beautiful thing of it. It's a powerful thing. Unless you experience it and let yourself experience it, you'll never really know. But even for us priests who confer the sacrament, it's a very wonderful feeling to give somebody absolution and to feel that those sins melt away, because you feel the power of darkness leave them. There's darkness that we collect with sin, and certainly for exorcists we feel this all the time, and you get quite good at seeing it when you're walking around in public. You can see who's carrying a great deal of that burden, and in absolution it all just gets wiped away and you feel it go, and it's a great feeling.
And the other thing is, and this I am absolutist about this, is that priests shouldn't hear confessions unless they make their own confession.
Absolutely.
And so there's also that kind of, you're both father and brother in that moment, because your father, offering God's absolution, but you're also one who experiences that in the sacrament themselves, and that's why I just love this description. That confession is one sinner speaking to another sinner. It's the and it's why it's part of the ritual. Go and pray for me, a sinner too. Yep. It's explicitly said. It's not a sense of I'm coming to some guru that's better than me. It's a fellow sinner who's given a special grace through ordination, not through any personal ability, for the Holy Spirit to act through them to absolve sins, which was Christ's primary concern. Two concerns to the risen Christ. He opened his arms with wounds on them and said, "Peace be to you," to those disciples. He didn't say, "Now's time for my revenge." He said, "Peace be to you, all you who abandoned me to the cross. Peace be to you." Yeah. And then he said, "Receive the Holy Ghost. Whose sins you forgive, they're forgiven. Whose sins you retain, they're retained." Yeah. It was the primary focus of the resurrected Christ ministry, and it continues to be his primary focus. And so I another image I've had is, it's about two people in the desert, but one knows the source of water. Yeah. It's so it's outside of ourselves, but we're leading to that oasis. It's just beautiful. Confession is the most beautiful.
Oh, it is. It's truly the most beautiful, the most profound. There's something just about it.
So if anybody is putting it off thinking, they'll think I'm terrible or dirty or horrible or, whatever, it's the total opposite.
Oh, we've heard it all.
Completely opposite.
There is nothing that you can shock us or surprise us with. Okay. I mean, I have heard everything. You name it. I have heard it. I've heard the worst. And, there's nothing that will surprise me. So yeah, by all means, and that's true for every confessor that you go to. Okay. Particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, where they're going to be hearing countless more, a lot. Yeah. I mean, they're doing this all the time. I'm doing this on, certain occasions because my ministry works very differently than a pastoral ministry. But I mean, in a parish, yeah, I mean, they're going to be hearing thousands and thousands and thousands of confessions every year. Hopefully they are. I mean, these days, who knows? Maybe they're only getting two. What's our next question?
I think, Brandon, did you get the next one? I didn't write it down. Tiffany had a follow-up.
Oh, okay.
She says, how does one re-enter a state of grace?
Well, that's confession.
Right.
I mean, that's confession and Eucharist. That's how you maintain, your connection to grace, which is why extreme unction includes those two components. So like when a person is dying and they get called in for last rites, what takes place is not just the holy anointing, but it's also their last confession typically and their last Eucharist, which is referred to as viaticum. So, this is, and it's very interesting. I've given last rites a few times, and every single time, the person was unconscious. And in these kinds of situations, you can't just provide, you can't just shove a full host into their mouth. That's not appropriate. So what you typically do is you just break a tiny, tiny speck off and just let it dissolve on their tongue. You put it under their tongue or something like that. And
so I think Tiffany's question was more so relating to a mortal sin, the confession of a mortal sin.
Well, the same answer, okay. Confession and then Eucharist. You don't need. It's
important to say, though. I mean, you drew a distinction between in Orthodox Church, the expectation is that you make your confession today, then you receive communion. That is actually the expectation in the Roman Catholic Church as well.
It is.
It's just that it's fallen out of use.
But that's why they do it on Saturdays.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that you're ready for the liturgical day ahead.
But not many go.
No, not like in the Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy, they take it more seriously. Roman Catholic Church, it's looked at as a burden. I don't need to tell this priest my sins. I'll just go to God. Is what that's the attitude.
Or I don't like the priest, so I'm not going to talk to him.
Yeah, right. That's the other thing. Or he's a worse guy than I am. I'm a better person than he is. That's the attitude they have. It's a complete misunderstanding.
Which might well be true, but
it doesn't change anything. Yeah. But anyway, what I was saying with viaticum is that it's interesting is that you take a little particle off and you break it and place it under their tongue. But every single time the unconscious person suddenly becomes wide awake and opens their mouth and receives the whole thing. And then they pass away within minutes, usually afterwards. It's the most amazing thing I have seen. It's been a consistent thing I have seen. Tracy even witnessed this one time. It was powerful. But it just goes to show the grace. So yes, to die in a state of grace or to return to a state of grace, we use, if you're unbaptized, then baptism is what restores you. If you're baptized, then confession, reconciliation, and absolution is what restores you. And then the Eucharist is what sustains you. If you're in just venial sin, and I say this cautiously because technically speaking, I think these are technicalities that we don't really need. The Orthodox Church doesn't make these designations. Sin is sin. It all leads to death anyway. But the Church likes to distinguish it because it says, in the Roman Catholic Church distinguishes it by saying that, venial sins don't separate you or sever your connection to God. Mortal sin does. And so different things need to happen. However you want to look at it, basically it's different way, more complex way of saying the same thing. Anyway, if you're just in venial sin, then the Eucharist and the general absolution at the start of every Mass actually absolves you of those sins. That's why we have the Kyrie at the beginning, and we always do there's a general absolution after the Kyrie. But that does not work for mortal sin. Okay, so
I mean, the reason I think those distinctions are so, and I know that you feel so arbitrary, is that I can't imagine a period in my life where I've been in venial sin and not mortal sin at the same time.
Well, it depends on how you look at it, Father, because there's there's another philosophical approach to it where mortal sin is almost impossible to commit if you're doing it by the book. Because you have to,
because the definition
is you have to be in full consent. And who among us is ever in full consent of our faculties? I mean, we're at the mercy of our passions all the time. We're not cautious or careful. And yes, that is a fault of ours, but it reduces culpability to the point that some might argue that mortal sin's almost impossible to commit because of it. And I've heard Jesuits typically make that argument. Now when you're talking to like Franciscans, they're gonna have a different approach to it. Essentially, I mean, I see what you're saying too, because I do tend to think that I do make examinations of conscience on a very regular basis, and I can see the root of sin. If you have
any standards at all, then someone cuts me off in the car, or I'm road rage central, and that's not good. That's a mortal sin. That kind of violent kind of aggression towards people. Maybe I'm just worse than some people, but but I just think, or things like, again, ignorance doesn't absolve you really, because not being at the sacrifice of the Mass on a Sunday is a mortal sin.
And that's something people don't want to accept, but it's true.
And most people would let themselves off with that. They treat it like a venial sin. So I just think the distinction is probably quite damaging to people's spiritual welfare.
Well, see, Orthodoxy tends to look at that, like their attitude is, why would you not come to divine liturgy? Like, what? Yeah. I mean, they look at it as you need to eat, don't you? I mean, you don't just be like, I don't think I'm going to eat today. I'm not going to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Just going to starve myself today. That's all I'm going to do. And it's a choice you could make, but you wouldn't logically make that choice. So to an Orthodox Christian, it's not logical to deprive yourself of going to liturgy on Sunday. It's like, why would you even do that? You don't need a mortal sin hanging over your head to force you to go. You should just immediately be like, I need to eat. I need my spiritual sustenance today. And I like that attitude. Unfortunately, I don't think you could ever get Roman Catholics to convert into it. I think you have to almost, dare I say it, I think it's something that you're kind of born with as a cradle Orthodox that it's missing in Catholic thinkers. They just don't think like that. I didn't.
I'm saturated in it. That's why.
That's what it is. Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but it's one of the, I guess, the deficits of East and West at the break. And I think we would have been a far more logical church if we had stayed together. If the Great Schism had not occurred, I think our approach, having both arms working correctly together, I think we would have seen some really wonderful results from that. That unfortunately has been lost to.
I love the
schism.
image of both lungs. They're both lungs.
Yeah,
breathing in unison.
Breathing in unison. That's right. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna take our last break here before we get to our final hour. When we come back, it's all your questions. I promise. We won't get so long-winded. So go ahead, log your questions now. Call into the show. We'll take them when we get back here.
Destined to find one another, like lightning and thunder. Can't have one without the other. It was raining in the stars. Oh, we can't be torn apart. We are linked together, forged in fire forever. We are linked together, together. Past the rings of Saturn, across the Milky Way, where it's waiting diamonds. We'll pretend someday, speaking without words, in perfect harmony. I'll run away with you to another galaxy. It was raining in the stars. Oh, we can't be torn apart. We are linked together, forged in fire forever. We are linked together, together. Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in us. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it away. Tonight, we're gonna let it away. Tonight, we're gonna let it just like the sunrise. We're gonna let it away. Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up, babe. Tonight we gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final part of Vestiges After Dark. We're taking your questions tonight, and we've been talking a lot about theology. It just seemed to be the direction it happened to go this time. So hopefully you're enjoying it. Seems like it's keeping audience interest from the numbers I'm seeing. But now we'd like to talk with you about your questions, your stories, your comments. Call into the show, 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Enter PIN number 855-4111 to be placed into the queue. That's 855-4111. You can also ask your questions in the chat room on YouTube. And if you're international, call free on Skype by dialing up Eye of the Seer. Hope to talk to you soon. We'll be back in just a moment. calling in with the 505 area code from New Mexico. Hello, you're on the air. Hey, Val, how you doing? Okay.
Coming up.
Do we have any? Okay, go ahead. There was a problem with your microphone.
Yeah,
I was hearing you, but it wasn't going through to the rest. So could you repeat your question, Val? I'm sorry. This is Val calling in from New Mexico. Go again.
I will. Okay.
Gotcha.
My question is, do you and Jamie have anything in the works, in production, coming up?
Okay, so what's going on with production? So we've been working on a documentary that's been ongoing for the last several years. That is it will be done when it's done. And that's something that we work on a case-by-case basis. So the producer only really comes in with his crew when we have a case that first is willing to be filmed and second is one that's viable enough or different enough for the purposes of what the documentary is trying to portray, which is the fullness and the authenticity of this work, every dimension of it, which is really the best part about it, is that he's spending time actually getting into the nitty-gritty details of every aspect of it, not just the fun and exciting parts that you tend to see on the mainstream television. So
you see how things really are.
yes,
in this
and
work.
he's showing it in that real way and with all of the boring parts as well. So that's something we've been working on consistently for the last several years. There is I'm not going to mention which media outlet, but there's a major media outlet that has recently reached out. It wants to do a documentary series, a docu-series on exorcism, and has asked for my potential participation. They want a case though, and sometimes that can be difficult because these days in particular, a lot of people do not want to go on television. Even if you change their name and fuzz out their faces with pixelation.
That's what I'm running into with a lot of our newer cases.
They don't want it.
No one wants, to be put out there and ridiculed. I think today, actually, the answer was, I don't want no one else in my business.
Yeah.
So,
and I think,
it's understandable.
It's understandable,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they do a really good job masking your identity. So I don't think it would be a problem, but it's tough sometimes to convince people because they're not contacting us. Usually the authentic ones are not contacting us to get on TV. It's the fake ones that are, the malingerers, they're contacting us to get on TV. So there's that.
Sure.
As far as Ghost Adventures goes, that is an open-ended relationship. So if they get something or if we get something that works for the purposes of the show, then that is always something that could happen at any time. So with Ghost Adventures, we don't get a lot of warning. Typically, it will be the night or two before.
Yeah.
And then we have to go. So it's usually an emergency case that ends up falling into their lap. And then, or if I get one that happens to be out on, where they want to be filming, they kind of are limited to certain places. And if it's a case that's viable again, sometimes if they're really viable, they don't want to be on TV. And if they're not viable, they don't work. So they might be willing to go on TV, but they don't work for that it's not a viable case. So that's what makes it challenging. So, but I have talked with Zach and, he's very excited about doing another show, another episode at some point. It's just a matter of the right case coming along. And I think this hopefully does prove to the skeptics out there that these are not actors. These aren't fake cases that, that Zach's pulling together to, pull the wool over all your eyes. The reason I have not been on, Jamie and I have not been on the show, is because there just hasn't been any case that warrants it. That's the only reason. And sometimes it can go a long time before you find a viable case. True demonic possession is so rare. I can't even tell you how rare it is. And a lot of these situations are not ones that are really appropriate or interesting enough for television. They just need very simple solutions. And so that's part of the reason why you haven't seen us on Ghost Adventures for a while. It's not because of any other reason, just there hasn't been a good case. But when a good case comes Zach's way, and I think he's actually asking, I think he went on social media this week.
He did on Twitter.
Yeah. And on
Twitter.
Instagram too.
Yeah.
He was asking for cases involving home or business. So if there's one that comes his way that needs the help of our services, I'm sure you'll see us on. That could happen at any time, but we just don't ever know. But those are the only productions that are being worked, are the only ones that are in the cards right now.
Oh, that makes sense. But if it was a really bad case or a real case, as you would say, would they just be opposed to you being involved, period?
Well, I think that they do go by the discretion of the victim involved. So if the victim doesn't want...
No, I mean the victim.
Right.
Right, the victim.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they be opposed to you?
Yes, that happens on a regular basis, and that's also part of the reason why you haven't seen us on Ghost Adventures, because that has happened.
And you get people who cancel last minute.
Mm-hmm. In fact, we had a few cases.
Oh, okay.
We had a few cases that we were working with the GAC on and trying to start the preliminary process, because when we're doing it with them, it's not just our side of the work, which is having to assess the actual case, but it's also getting the case prepared for production, because there's a lot that needs to go into the pre-production aspect of making an episode. And that's just the reality of it. Ghost Adventures has usually like 15, 20 minutes of like B-roll stuff where they shoot like sort of like the story, and then they do reenactments and things for the story to kind of set the stage before they do the investigation and then show you the resolution with us. So, that takes planning, that takes writing. They have to get the writing teams together. They have to talk to the people, get the whole story, put it together in a way that makes sense for the show. And, the cases that we have presented to the GAC they've got cold feet at the end last minute and didn't want to follow through with it, so it never materialized. And that's
right.
just something.
Some of these cases that we thought were GAC material, I
out.
do most of the vetting for it, and it'll fizzle out. Or when it gets time to, hey, you need to talk to their production folks. They're going to ask you questions I can't come up with, and they're going to have to make you feel comfortable. Then they just ghost.
Yeah, that's not our job. But
yeah, that's not us.
I don't want to give the impression that, if we send a message to Bishop Bryan, we can get on Ghost Adventures. That's not going to work. Okay,
No.
you're gonna be so vetted that if you're faking it, there's no point in even
I'm
trying.
going to find out if you're faking it.
We know what to look for, and you're not going to get through. But if you do have a genuine, honest to God case, and you don't mind being on the show, and you happen to be in the particular filming locations that they're limited to, which I'm not going to mention because I don't want to give anybody any ideas.
We could figure it out from watching the show, though.
You could probably figure it out from watching the show, but
I won't say.
But there's yes. I mean, then send in your cases to us, and there is a chance that if you have a genuine case, and it is vetted properly, and it will be vetted to hell and back by us before it ever gets to the cameras. But if you don't mind being on camera, then there's a good chance. Because what's good about this is that typically these locations are costly for us to get to. Okay, so I try to not put the burden on the church. So if we ever take a case that's outside of our general jurisdiction, then what we like to do is see if the client is willing to donate whatever those costs happen to be, which can sometimes be a lot higher than you think because it's expensive out there to travel. If they can't afford the full amount, then we try to see what they can afford and have the church sort of make up the difference. Sometimes we can get some special donations by our top benefactors to fill in some of those blanks so that the church doesn't get depleted with a case like this. But the best thing is to just be like, if it happens to be in a production location, just be willing to go on camera, and then we can go for free. You get us, and honestly, you could have us all night. So even if after the cameras go, there's been several situations where we've been brought out for Ghost Adventures. They filmed their stuff. They finished the episode, and we're still there, and we stay there and continue to work with the family after the cameras stop rolling.
Yeah, one in particular case, was it the
Fontana? It was, yeah.
Yeah, that was not a very well received show, but a lot of stuff actually happened after they left.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that was never captured.
That was never put on the episode.
And but there was more to it than what was seen there.
It was pretty complex.
Yeah,
actually.
There was something going on there. I mean, it was definitely not. It was not a dud. It was not a dud case by any stretch. But so that's how it works. So this was not always the case. There was back in the day. I wasn't giving. Suggesting cases to the GAC. But I think now we've reached a point in our relationship where there's a mutual beneficial thing. I can take cases that would cost the church a lot of money to go to because production can pay for that. And at the same time, they might get an episode that is a very interesting case to feature. So it kind of is a win-win for everybody. And the clients, it's a win for the client because they get us and it doesn't cost them a dime. They just have to be willing to be on camera with it, but all that has to come together for us to do a show, and it can be challenging. It can be really, really challenging to get genuine cases. The genuine ones are the ones that are the hardest to convince to go on the camera. When someone's like, "Yeah, I'll go on," then you have to kind of like be okay. Let's make sure that this is actually really happening, because if they're too eager, then that's usually a sign that it might not be all that they think it is. But that's why you haven't seen us, because it just hasn't been. We've been in a lull. Not that there hasn't been a lot of good cases. I would say that, oh my God, yesterday we received 5 new intakes.
Yeah, my email was blown up.
Yeah, I sent half to you, half to Janet.
Looks really good.
Yeah.
I was trying to get in touch with that client actually to come on the show and ask some questions, since we have 2 priests tonight. But unfortunately,
no call.
They didn't call back.
No call. No one's in the queue right now except for Val. So. It just happens that a lot of good cases, none of them want to go on TV.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
As always.
Certainly.
Just had to ask. I just had to ask.
No, I'm glad you did. It's a good question, and I'm sure a lot of people's minds, and hopefully that settles the curiosity, because it's certainly not because we don't want to do it.
We do have a local case next week.
Yes, we do.
It's a local case.
It's a local case, and
it's not going to be.
It's not one we can stream.
Right.
There is a haunting that came in locally, right? And
there's a couple of them.
Very serious haunting, like the woman's being pulled out of bed.
Yes.
And they might be willing to at least let us live stream.
That's who I was trying to get to come on the show tonight to at least give us some more information.
Yeah.
And have advice from 2 priests.
Yeah. So that's something that we might be able to feature if we get I don't do exorcism cases on YouTube. I won't do that.
No, I don't think you should either.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. But hauntings, we do on YouTube. When we get a case that's a genuine haunting, we will stream if we can get good internet. If the client doesn't mind us logging into their internet and streaming live from their house, we will stream all night from the location on the YouTube channel. We've only really done that once or twice, I think, but with much success. It was kind of nice to have everybody there, and sometimes people might see something that we didn't see, and we could go back and, you kind of help us with the investigation. So it's always a lot of fun, but it's only really appropriate for hauntings. It's not really appropriate for when people are being attacked.
I might come out and go with you.
Yeah, that'd be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah, that'd be fun. So, that you can look forward to any one of those possibilities, but I don't know when the documentary is going to be finished. That's what's going to be done when it's done. Ghost Adventures could happen tomorrow or next year, or not for another 2 seasons. We just don't know. It all depends on if those all fall together in the right way. As far as the media docuseries, I haven't signed anything yet. So it's just been, we've just been in talks. They're just in the research stage. So that's something
COVID really messed up our flow.
It did. We were like, we could barely stay home.
Yeah, after we got out of it, it's just been hard to get back ramped up again.
And that was something that happened with GAC. Like in 2020,
we couldn't travel.
Zach, the production manager reached out to us. The production manager at the time, I don't think he's there. He's not with the team anymore, but he's moved on to a different project. But he contacted me and asked. He says, how are your feelings on travel? And I said, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm not worried about getting sick. I don't know how well it's going to be for Jamie and I to be in coach for 5-6 hours with a mask on our face.
Not happening.
Doing connection flights and not being able to take it off, and the militant way that people were back then. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to play that game, so I knew that wasn't going to work.
I had to do a hospital visit last week. Two actually, and here at hospitals they're still requiring masks, which is just totally. I think basically there's no end to it then, because everyone knows it does nothing to prevent COVID. But anyway, leaving that to one side, actually, I had a psychological reaction to having to put a mask on again.
That's my issue. I start to hyperventilate.
I'm not sure.
I do too, Jamie.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
I'm just not up for it. I just can't do it again.
Yeah, I can't get enough air. I start to sweat, and I start to have almost like an anxiety attack.
Yeah, that's like what it is for me. And I just think, what am I supposed to do? One of them was a parishioner who, needed to be anointed. And so, you suck it up and you get on with it with the help of God. But honestly, I just think, I'm not sure. Well, there's no way I could have, the scenario you were given, no way I could have spent 6 hours on a plane.
Well, and that's 6 hours on a plane, and then two hours, at the airport getting through security, and then 2 hours with your connection flight, maybe. And having to do this both ways. I mean, it was just like, it would be hours and hours and hours of it, and I just wasn't willing. So I said, look, when things normalize, you've got me. But right now, I'm not willing to travel under these conditions. And I know it from my own personal experience, because one thing masks do work for is allergies. Because, pollen is actually large. It can actually get caught.
Compared to a virus.
And I mean, a virus is so small, there's no way that a mask is going to help you with that. But allergens, it does. So when I get on the tractor to mow the property, okay, I do wear one for that. Sometimes I have people do it. But the problem is, I hate dealing with landscapers. They're typically assholes. There's like three groups that I can't stand working with. Landscapers, barbecuers, and lawyers. I can't stand those three groups.
I'm with you on the lawyers.
Yeah.
Defense attorneys, anyway.
Politicians.
Yeah, well,
same difference.
I don't deal with politicians. I mean, they're just they don't even enter my world. They would not be welcome here. Yeah. So, but those are the three groups. I mean, sometimes you need a lawyer, and I do have one good one that I've worked with, but most of them suck. So those are the three ones I can't stand. And the reason is, it's like, there's something about, particularly with barbecuers and landscapers, they get into this because they can't do anything else. And they do their own thing, and they're real like nasty sons of bitches, and I can't stand it. So it's like, I do my own barbecuing typically, and I don't go to barbecue restaurants typically for that reason. And
Brazilian ones.
Brazilian, that's different. That's a different matter.
That's different barbecue.
Fogo has a different work ethic, but when it comes to the getting on the tractor, I will put on a mask, because the allergies in Georgia are just terrible.
Oh yeah.
So I'll tell you, like, it doesn't take me more than maybe 30 minutes to mow everything, because most of the property is forest, and I don't need to mow that. But the area around the house is grass, and actually it's weeds. But I mean, it's rock in the front, and it's weeds on the side and the back. So I have to cut all that down. And I mean, I'll tell you, after 30 minutes of wearing that thing, I mean, it's like I feel faint. I feel lightheaded. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I could have done 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of this shit, one way, and then have to do it all again and come back. No freaking way. So I made the right decision for me.
Even when I was working law enforcement, I was part of the methamphetamine lab cleanup crew. And you go to the Quantico, get trained by the DEA. You've got the Tyvek suit, the SCBA, or the respirator on.
Yeah.
And even then, you're required every 45 minutes to come back out and switch out and take that mask off, get fresh air, and hydrate.
Yeah.
So 45 minutes is about the max for me, so I can't even imagine.
But back in those days, you take it off on a Delta flight, they ban you for life.
Right.
I mean, there are people that were banned for life for taking the damn mask off on the plane. It's like, I'm just, there's no way I'm putting myself in that situation. It would go bad. We were talking earlier about, angry thoughts, Father. You're talking about like road rage and stuff. And I'm thinking, it's like, there's something very interesting about our evolution, because I am an evolutionist. I'm a creationist too, but I believe that God created through evolution. And I'm seeing right now that I need to go ahead and prioritize the device because I did not do it. It only will prioritize for 2 hours, and I have to do it at the 3rd hour, but sometimes it gives you a grace period, and I can't do it during the break because it's still operational and it won't let me reset until after the break. But once we come back on the air, I forget because I start talking. So let me go ahead.
So one of the other things while you're doing that about the whole mask issue is it's hard. If we had to do a minor rite on someone, we get right in their faces. And during this time, everybody was wearing masks. Everywhere you went, you had to wear a mask.
Yep.
It's hard to confer that rite. Because you have to, I'm sure you've seen both of us.
It's next to impossible.
Right,
it's on the breath.
We're right in
it's
their
the breath.
The
power's in the breath.
And they're hearing.
You can't do that,
and you can't confer it.
Which told me that the whole thing was some type of satanic operation. Honestly, I will say that it was definitely from the pits of hell. This entire approach towards everything. And even its obsession with science.
Some people compared it to like the Second World War, the Blitz spirit, but it wasn't. It was very different. The difference was in the Blitz in London, people are all gathered together in the underground with a common enemy that's outside of them.
Right.
But with the COVID thing, your beloved was your enemy.
Yeah.
You're going to give it each other. Like your neighbor was your enemy. And so it was really pernicious. I mean,
very Mao.
You could not design a more demonic plan.
Yeah.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. So what was I saying? I was saying something before this thing distracted me again because it's always the
You're
internet.
saying you hate barbecuers.
After the barbecuers. After the barbecuers. You know why I hate barbecues? They're never freaking open. It's like, who closes a barbecue restaurant on a Sunday?
It takes time to make that meat right. Right?
How do you close a restaurant on a
Sunday?
Sunday? I'm sorry, if you're in the restaurant business, you can't close on Sunday. Sunday's one of the big times to eat. People are home. They won't want to cook. They want to go out.
Tell Chick-fil-A that.
I know. Wow.
Hey, look, they're all in church.
I don't agree with it. I really think that, if you want to observe the Lord's Day, then the restaurant business is not for you.
Hey, do you want to hear something exciting though on that front? As you know, I was all around the British Isles the last 8 weeks, and in Cardiff and in Brighton, there is Popeye chicken.
Is it really?
And apparently they're opening up more in the UK, and I don't hear that
rice.
once in California.
Yeah.
So
it's actually kind of good. It's a little spicy, a little heat there. Yeah. It's good stuff.
Displace KFC.
They got good biscuits too.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Damn it, I forgot what I was saying.
We were talking about not being able to tolerate the mask for longer than 30 minutes.
Right. And then we went off on something else, but it was after that. And I was about to say it, and then I noticed that we were going red.
Right, I saw that too.
And I'm like, shit. And then
don't ask me to remember. I'm 50 going on 80.
Does anybody in the chat room remember what I was about to say? Tell me if you remember, and let me know. I'm gonna keep the chat up for a minute so I can watch and see if anybody remembers what I was saying. If not, we can go to our next question if there is one. Is there a question?
I don't have one. Brandon, did you see anything?
I've not seen anything in the chat, no.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or anything before, or somebody can help me remember where I was going with my last train of thought? Because it was right after we were talking about being on the mower and having the masks on,
Right.
and how that was making me, feel like.
So there was no way you'd be able to do a flight.
You had said something about creationism.
Well, we went from talking about THC to flying and not being able to fly, and then having to wear the mask. Delta.
Brandon got it. He was talking about, I'm an evolutionist and a creationist.
Yes.
I believe that God used evolution to create. So, and where I was going with that, because I was talking about Father Chris talking about the road rage and everything.
Yes.
And I was talking about being on the plane and how I don't want to put myself into situations where I could get aggressive and then be banned for life, because that would not be a good thing. So I was thinking about, the nature of sin and how it takes us back. And we were having this conversation at dinner tonight. It was kind of a weird deviation, but it's kind of interesting. One of the mysteries of evolution is that how did we go from primate to Homo sapien, to the Homo sapien that we are, when we're still primates, but a very sophisticated primate, in such a short period of time? That doesn't seem possible. And so you get some people that come up with the ancient alien theories and say
Anunnaki.
that they took our DNA and they mixed it with primates, and they gave us a little bit of themselves or something and created Homo sapiens, whatever. Okay, so there's all sorts of conspiracies in the paranormal realm about this. But I think the answer is actually a lot more simple than that, and actually more down to earth and realistic. And one thing that you will notice, that when that change happened, what was different around the time where we can trace it back to where we transitioned, or when that start, or where we suspect that start was, primates started eating meat. They started becoming predators.
Right.
Okay. So when you start looking at the animal kingdom, predators are the smartest animals. It's the herbivores that are kind of dumb and dim. I mean, look at herbivorean animals. They're not typically bright animals, but the predators are cunning and smart. And you can see this all throughout. Look at the smartest animals. They're all meat eaters. And so there's some theories that suggest that what caused the great shift in our evolution to go from primate to the Homo sapien that we are, so to lower primate to Homo sapien, is the fact that we started consuming large quantities of animal protein. Vegetable protein does not do the same thing. Yes. Vegetable protein does not do the same thing.
Absolutely
because
not.
there are people that there are pet owners that try to make their cats vegan by giving them
and kill them.
And they kill.
And they die. They die on the vegetable protein, because vegetable protein is not the same thing, and a cat needs to eat just basically meat. It's a diet of meat, whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, don't own a cat, okay? Because that's what comes with taking care of a cat. They need to eat meat. So what's really very interesting about that is that the very thing that leads to our sophistication is also, in turn, the thing that is at the root of our sin, which is our aggressive nature and our cunning, our intellect and our cunning and our aggression, all our predatorial characteristics. And even the sins, the greatest sins that we commit, murder, rape, I think most people would consider murder and rape to be the worst that man can do. Torture, I guess, in there, throw that one in there somewhere. Are all very aggressive, predatorial types of things to do. Watch a cat with its prey. It tortures it. It has fun with it. It gets pleasure from watching it suffer and enjoy it. It does. And this is common predatorial behavior, and we are predators. We are we're actually.
It's why I always laugh when the environmentalist types talk about how beautiful nature is. I think, are you really?
It's not really all that beautiful.
It's the same as people can't understand. How can you talk about a baby, an original sin? Go to a nursery. They try and kill each other all day. Like, it's like people really don't look at things as they are. They look at them as they think they are.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to know, I mean, I guess it would be, it's interesting. It's still a mystery as to how it happened with just us, that maybe just conditions were just right. But one of the common factors, it seems to be, with our evolution was that our consumption of large quantities of animal protein seemed to develop our brain at a very rapid rate. And it led to a shift in our evolution that was not typical, because that's one of the things the creationists will argue, is say, well, if we're primates, which, I mean, how do you argue that? But I mean, they're like, well, why aren't the other primates? Like, why are the chimpanzees not smart like we are? Why is it just us? Well, there's obviously something biological that was unique to us at the same time. But I just found it kind of philosophically interesting to think about the very thing that leads to our path, which is very theological when you think about it, because isn't that kind of like a biological scientific analogy to Oh Happy Fault? Because it's like the very thing that is the darkness. The source of our darkness is also the thing that leads to our salvation, because now what brings us to a sense of self-awareness, sophistication, being able to make moral decisions, and then also being able to overcome. Because it's like, okay, you can't just argue, okay, we're predators, that's all we are, so you got to be forgiving when people rape someone or murder someone, because we're predators. That's what predators do. The animals are, all these predators, they're raping and killing each other. They're killing things all the time. Okay. But we have also been led, because of this rapid state of evolution, to now be able to rationalize it in a way and overcome those instincts. So at the same time, we got a call coming in with Father Firth. Let's go ahead and bring him on here. I'm sure he always has something interesting to say. Hello, Father. Come on in. Oh, wait, hang on a second. We got to get you in here. Okay. Let's see if that works. All right, Father, you should be on.
Not yet.
It's got a long way to travel.
I think.
Let's try this again here. Okay. Father, you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes,
hear you
sir.
now. Yep.
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to, get my head around the delay and the lag between what you were talking about and where you're at.
Oh yeah, there's always about 20 seconds delay on the live feed. That's for sure.
Because while Father Chris was running around the UK, I had the opportunity to run around South Africa.
Oh.
And while there, we went and visited the Cradle of Humankind. And it was fascinating seeing the spot where, according to DNA, our unchanged, uncorrupted Homo sapien DNA has existed for hundreds of thousands of years. And the very people, the original us, in inverted commas, the sand people, they didn't change. And it was the groups of people that left, for some reason that traveled, that left. When they come back, there's something different about us. So it's not in what we ate. It's not in the location we were in. It was something about having traveled, having left the land and taken probably what we were doing there, trying to get it to work somewhere else. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then returning.
That is interesting, because if you think about the cultures that have driven culture the furthest, fastest, whatever, they are ones that have traveled. I mean, it happens by the building of empires. And so
that's
a really
why
interesting thought.
It is, and that's why I think that there's obviously got to be different like more than just one factor at work. It can't be, it's got to be a combination of things that came together in just the right way, because it's kind of interesting that we are the only species on this planet that evolved to the level of sophistication that we are currently at. I mean, you can look at even really smart mammals, take, I guess, dolphins are usually considered to be pretty smart. But they're not building airplanes. They're not building rocket ships to the moon. So there's something unique about us. I mean, I guess you get theological about that, of course.
Well, we learn to adapt, necessity being the mother of invention. I think leaving and going out, learning new things, having to survive different climates, different other predators, and environments. You have to learn, and I think we built upon that. But I do still think that
our consciousness
is a big deal.
The consciousness you mentioned is allied to our intellect. And so, which is what generates conscience, just to come full circle which is why we end up with complexes and need to go to confession.
Right.
But, so I think, that's the unique. I mean, we were, from a theological point of view, would say, well, that's because we were made in the image and likeness of God, which of course is also the foundation for men and women being equal. They were equally valuable, made in the image and likeness of God, which is why our culture is experiencing that as it removes the Judeo-Christian story as the central story of our being.
Right.
It descends into this kind of there can't actually be equality between men and women, so they try to obliterate the differences, which is not the same thing. So I think maybe, and partly being made in the image and likeness of God, the theological answer is to say, well, God creates, and we're made in that image and likeness, so we are creative, and that's what. Now there is a creativity at work in nature outside of the human species, but we all know, like you said, it's not the sort of creativity that builds a rocket ship to go to the moon.
No, definitely not. There's something unique to us, and
yeah.
I mean, let's look. I mean, let's face it. Father Firth is saying it was traveling, right? And some of these evolutionary biologists.
I'm not saying it was the traveling, but there was something in the leaving.
Right.
That changed the people that left. They actually bring back development. They bring back a new culture rather than just finding something to eat and continue. They bring art. They bring growth, change. Which didn't occur in the people that had initially stayed. And of course, when we try to force that or encourage that in other primate species, we actually trick ourselves into thinking that they've developed it. Like when we try to say, they've learnt sign language. Well, actually, they haven't learnt sign language. They've just gotten used to mimicking a gesture that gets us to give them the orange.
Yeah.
They don't actually have the capacity to modify that, change that, and then utilize it with one another.
Yeah.
It's not a real growth.
They're not actually cognitively making this process of language within their minds where they understand what it is that they're saying and thinking about. You're right. It is. It's a mimicking it's a type of behavioral therapy, ultimately, is what it amounts to. It's behaviorism at its most fundamental. The salivating dog, it's essentially
Pavlov's dog.
Yeah, it's basically that. Yeah, it's Pavlov's dog, So there's something unique. I mean, I don't know exactly what I do think it is a combination of factors. I think, though, that there is something definitely to be said for that. This idea of bringing back and sharing new experience changes us. And I think that does, too, because when we look at people that are well-traveled versus people that have locked themselves into one little corner of the country.
If you stay in your little box and never leave it, and you live in that comfort, you're never going to grow.
Never going to grow.
So,
it's... I mean, I think
that's the eternal agony, isn't it? I mean, it's as old as humans are. This kind of sense of we're from Eden and we want to return there, but we can't. You know, and it's the same with your hometown. I mean, I on my travels went to my hometown, and my hometown's a special place, and it holds a spiritual connection to me that nowhere else does. But I walked around and I don't think I bumped into anybody I know. So you go to your hometown and you're the stranger, because you've been away,
right.
And that's the sort of turmoil. But of course, it's a healthy turmoil. It's not one to be avoided. I mean, the great shame of our age is that people think they've got to be comfortable all the time. Actually, it's when you're deeply uncomfortable that you tend to grow and learn and figure things out. So,
well, I mean, I think we can, if we're going to be good if we emulate Jesus. What did he do? He traveled and he ate meat.
More than that, he ate meat and drank a lot with his friends.
There you go. Yes,
yeah, that's right.
I think that might be really what it comes down to.
But there are two things there. I mean, Mystic has touched on taking the kill into yourself. Does that affect you? I mean, we watched baboons stealing meat and eating it, and they have been doing that for hundreds of thousands of years, and they are still baboons.
Yeah. So there's something different. There's something
added to it.
So they're eating meat. We're eating meat. They've had no change. We did.
They're not eating cooked meat, though. They're eating raw meat.
And that might be it. I mean, maybe it's something to do with that, too, because, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, predators are smarter creatures than herbivores. There's no question about that. You can see that throughout the entirety of the animal kingdom. The most sophisticated types of animals and the most cunning are definitely the predators and meat eaters. But at the same time, you're right. They're eating raw. And I wonder if there's something to be said about the process of it, but I do think it's a combination of behavior too. I think there is something that we, like Father Firth is saying, the leaving and taking back and bringing back experience, the sharing of knowledge, I think by its very nature expands us. So that's something. So what is this question that we're seeing from
Mystic? Has a real good, this is a good student question.
This is Danielle. Yep.
Yeah. So she says, and on an esoteric level, taking in that kills aggregates into yourself, I wonder how that affects you.
On an esoteric level, taking in what now?
Taking in your kills aggregates.
Eating animals.
Okay. Well, okay. The thing is that animals, you're not eating other humans.
No, preferably not.
So that's where the cannibalism becomes problematic esoterically as well as morally. Let's take the morality out of it for a second. Just look at the esoteric. If you were eating other human beings, then you'd be taking in very sophisticated aggregates that are filled with archetypal patterns that, yes, you would be taking in the same way that we were talking about earlier with blood donation and organ donation. But animals don't have sophisticated archetypal patterns that, it doesn't, it's the same reason that your turkey at Thanksgiving doesn't haunt you when the bones of the carcass are left in the trash can. You're not going to get a ghost turkey coming to attack you at night in your room, because the sophistication of its aggregates is nowhere near at the level of a human being, which gets us back to what we were talking about here with the nature of our evolution, because there's something spiritually at work. Ultimately, it comes down to it. And Father Firth, you kind of touched on it when you mentioned bringing back art, because I've always said one of the things that doesn't need to exist, that almost shouldn't exist, if we're purely just an accident of the cosmos, purely scientific, random shit that just happened, then there's no reason for art and beauty and music.
Absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, and see, music's a big thing for me.
And there's something
that's why
divine and spiritual.
There's a war on art. There's a war on beauty. I mean, what's gone along with this kind of postmodern neo-Marxism are building box houses for people to live in.
Yes.
Eschewing as wasteful. Using precious resources to make something beautiful.
Yes.
And it's deeply inhuman to operate in that manner. That you're right, beauty and art are an utter waste of time, which is why they're so important.
Right. And that's I think part of the divine connection, because I mean, I would be willing to guess that animals do not have a concept of beauty.
It's super rational.
Yes.
It's not irrational.
Yeah.
It's super
rational. It's like it's beyond
rationality.
It is.
Yeah.
It's beyond intellect to be able to comprehend these things. Now, obviously, they have an appreciation for music, because when I play the piano, Heathcliff has to come down and listen to it.
And vibration.
There's certain things that he likes, but I think that's just more like, I think there's just patterns of sound that are relaxing that any animal can pick up. And he's a predator, so a little bit smarter, but at the same time, it is still, I don't think he's appreciating beauty. I think he's just enjoying a relaxing sound, which is different, but music can connect us. Art can connect us. Theater can connect us. They're all intimately linked to the archetypal sophistication, which is where I say that's where we bridge the gap between our mundane realm and the spiritual. The bridge happens at the archetypal realm, because all of these divine things,
soundtracks.
Yes, and why it's necessary. Have you ever tried to watch Star Wars? Look it up on YouTube. You can do this. It's profound. Watch Star Wars without John Williams.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody, they took the music out.
It doesn't work.
It does not work. It's so boring and weird. It's weird. It's like
we are hardwired for sound.
We're hardwired, and we feel it. We can experience. And I don't think there's any animal, even the real smart ones, that can comprehend that like this in the same way. So that's our divine connection. That's the God element.
And I think the other component to that is that they, apart from not experiencing it the same way, they don't emotively delight in it.
Yes. Yes.
Because if they did, they would replicate it for pleasure.
True.
Yeah.
Like your dog would go off and start trying to hum or sing the song in the background. Birds can mimic, but they just take it on as just another vocalization. It's not for pleasure.
Correct.
Yeah. If you saw the Mona Lisa on the floor, you'd pick it up and make sure it was protected.
Sure.
If a cat saw it on the floor, it'd sniff it and then lie on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or scratch it, or bite it.
Bite the corner of it.
Heathcliff would start to eat it if you left it down.
My kittens would devour it.
Anything you put on the floor, that is just an understood rule that now this could belong to me now. Yeah. That's how Heathcliff, that's what he says, because the floor is his domain. He knows that anything on the tables and stuff, that belongs to us. But if something that is clearly ours ends up on the floor, then now it's his domain. And sometimes, like the eraser here, he will, when we're not here, knock something onto the floor to make it his.
I think I want that to be mine.
And it's why we call people that can't appreciate art and beauty Philistines. That's why, there's something, we all know it. We all know that people that can't appreciate beauty are people who are less. No, they can develop that. What we're really saying is you should develop your abilities to. I mean, this is a conversation that every parent has with teenagers.
Right.
It's like, come on, get over yourself. Like, there are things more important than your comfort. There are, why should I wear, slacks and a shirt just because it's granddad's birthday, that kind of, well, because there are things you've not considered that are of higher importance.
No, it's true.
And the very people who want to turn you back into a machine, nothing but a cog in a wheel for them to make money.
That's right.
Yep.
The very things that they resent are not only music and art, but the time to be able to explore and be creative to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why. Look at what happens. I mean, manliness becomes cavemanish. You wear t-shirts, shorts, and thongs every day. Sorry, flip-flops every day. And you just eat barbecue food and drink beer. The idea. Whereas actually, we know that a man is more perfected who does more than that.
I would hope so.
Who can have a white tie dinner.
I would hope so, because I mean, you need to have a little French cuisine in your life. You know what I mean?
every once in a while.
And you need to own a cravat or two as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of the show, folks. I thank you so much. Thank you, Father Firth, for calling in, and thank you, Brandon and Val and Father Chris. It's always nice to have the full team here. And
Good to be back.
yeah, it is good to have you back. And
Welcome back.
Val, thank you for all the work that you do, and Danielle, all of you out there that help with the moderating.
Absolutely.
Paula, all of you. And we'll be back next week. Hopefully, Tracy will be feeling 100%, so she'll be here with us to do the show on why relationships fail. So we're going to get very philosophical next week about this, a little bit spiritual, a whole lot metaphysical, and a lot of psychology too. So you don't want to miss this show. I know it's something that comes up on a lot of people's minds, and we're going to break it down from two people that have had a very remarkably successful marriage of 21 years. So it's going to be an interesting show. You don't want to miss it. That's next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope to see you then. But until then, I'll see you out there in the ether.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.